Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Iron Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Multi-Type Hybrid Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku was having a really shitty day. The type of shitty that no amount of coffee or Kacen could save. The type of shitty not even 15 hours of sleep would erase. And that meant that it was really, F-I-N-G, shitty. Someone had outright spat on him on his way to school, another person had tripped him right as he was about to enter the classroom, making his entrance extra embarrassing and undignified. Then there was also the usual insults and whispered threats. It was always fun to receive those. And right now, he was on his way home, it was pouring down and he didn't have an umbrella. So naturally, he was soaked to the bone. Great. Not to mention that he thought taking a shortcut from his school was a good idea because he wouldn't bump into Kacen and his gang, and now he was walking down a pretty shady road. Most of the stores also had boards up instead of windows, probably because of robbery or something. The street was littered with trash from people who didn't have the energy to walk a few feet to use a trash can. Izuku didn't mind it too much, no one really knew him here so he probably wouldn't be disturbed unless somebody decided he was worth taking the time to kill. Wouldn't make much sense though, since he apparently, according to Kacen, was worthless in every way a person could be. That was fine he guessed, being worthless just meant that nobody depended on him for shit, and he was mostly just left alone. Except when people thought it was funny to pick on him, and unfortunately Izuku couldn't risk getting back at them. It would be satisfying as hell, but not worth it. He had to remind himself that a bunch of times every day, and honestly, he was getting sick of it. Maybe he should just drop out of school and get his own thing going. It's not like he could get a job from having an actual education, since hiring someone quirkless was considered the same as hiring someone blind or deaf. Izuku had the last laugh though. Even now he chuckled a bit to himself thinking about it. "Hey kid," he heard someone on his right say, before he was pulled into a damp alley and grabbed by the neck. "What are you doing here?" the man said mildly. He was pretty tall but skinny and he had dark hair and sharp teeth so he kinda resembled a vampire. This guy should totally try cosplaying. Izuku smiled and was about to give him a sassy reply when the guy lost his patience. "I asked you a question," he snarled, and then his teeth grew and his hair seemed longer. The nails at his throat also became longer and sharper. "How interesting. Let me guess," Izuku said, transformation type quirk that rapidly increases keratin. The villain blinked. "Cares what now?" Izuku rolled his eyes. "Keratin," he said slowly, "hair, nails." The villain looked as confused as ever, so Izuku decided to throw him a bone. "It's a protein that found in your vertebrates, but you probably wouldn't know what that is if you're trying to rob a 15-year-old. It took the villain a bit of time to catch up with the insult, but when he did he bared his teeth in a snarl. "You little dash." He was about to probably bite him, rip out his throat or something else fun, but Izuku didn't want to wait around for that, so he just grabbed the villain's wrist. The villain flinched away and fell on his butt, which wasn't very hygienic since someone most likely had said there recently, just going by smell. He looked up at Izuku with wide eyes. He smiled down at the villain, brandishing long canines. There was a reason he sometimes took these routes after all, and that expression, that shocked and fearful expression, was what he lived for. Good to see the villains desperate for once. If they like to take victims, then they should consider the possibility that someone more powerful would make them their victim, and that's what Izuku did. It was a kind of hobby for him, if you would. Since he had given up the dream of becoming a hero years ago. That goal had been lost when he realized just who he was. Entering the hero scene was off the table, not like he wanted to become a hero anymore anyways. Heroes were overrated, most of them just became heroes for the fame and money, not to mention power. It was all very corrupt to be honest, and he was content with this. This was fun. Playing the little defenseless quirkless kid, the perfect bait, just for him to bite back. Izuku laughed. This never gets old. Izuku might not be quirkless as people thought, but the truth was so much worse. Chapter text. Izuku had always known that society was F-ed. Of course people weren't created equal and all, some got stronger quirks than others and some got quirks that was just ridiculous to look at, like the guy from his class that could pop his eyeballs out of his sockets. Izuku would actually rather be quirkless. If he had to have freaky eyes to be accepted, then he would rather not. Honestly, some quirks were downright useless when push came to shove. And they bullied him for being quirkless? This world really was it. Currently, he was on his way to school, and despite everything he was in a good mood. He briefly thought back to the guy yesterday. After he had stolen his quirk, he had knocked the guy out and taken his memories of the encounter, a very convenient quirk he had stolen a few months ago. He had then headed home, after he got rid of the quirk to a passing pedestrian. He had to appear quirkless after all. He chuckled to himself when he thought about how the guy would react to realizing he had a second quirk. He would probably just assume that it was a late quirk manifestation, but his expression would definitely be golden. The shittiness from yesterday had mostly disappeared after he had fallen into bed after getting home and not shown sign of life for over 10 hours. The weather was also nice. The trees' branches were overflowing with pink blossoms, the sky was blue and the sun was shining. Hard to be in a bad mood, but not impossible, and Kacen was probably about to help prove that when he made it to the bloody school. So you could understand why he stopped to spectate when he saw a gigantic rat on the train tracks. It was like a very big rat. Obviously transformation quirk, he probably wasn't that size usually. The change would probably be triggered by distress or something, like a defense mechanism. Death Arms was the first hero on site. He caught a big metal beam that the villain had pushed onto the street. Then Backdraft was there and made a perimeter. Izuku thought as he turned towards the fight. Could be fun. Izuku approached the crowd of people gathered behind Backdraft and overheard two men talking. But man, turning into a monster's an amazing quirk. The other guy turned to him. What did he do? He stole someone's bag and went out of control when he was cornered. So I was right, Izuku thought smugly. A quirk like that and he's a bag snatcher? The other man replied, sounding unimpressed. Indeed, he could have probably joined a gang or something. Muscle like that was probably not something you'd come across every day, and no doubt people would be interested. He heard another guy apologizing into his phone because he couldn't make it to work in time because of the rat. Then a group of girls at the front of the crowd began squealing, announcing the Wood Hero's presence. Kamui went straight at the rat guy, who screamed at him to get away. The bloody big idiot probably hadn't seen this coming when he'd woken up this morning. SCKS for him. Just when the wood guy was about to launch his chain prison attack, a gigantic lady with purple horns kicked the villain right off the tracks, and Kamui was left standing there awkwardly. A new hero, huh? Izuku perked up. He had made it a habit to make profiles of every hero out there and had filled a lot of notebooks with that knowledge. Empty Lady's quirk was powerful but also clumsy. She couldn't use it while in big crowds, and even then she might be too big to be able to corner a villain properly if that villain was fast. She was probably best at fighting bigger opponents like the rat guy, but the damage caused to the surroundings could be severe. A pleasure to make your butt-acquaintance, the big lady said, winking. Izuku cringed and turned around, having seen enough. He walked the rest of the way to Aldra Junior High in relative peace, but as he entered the school that peace was broken. So much bloody noise. And some even stared at him as he passed. He just gave them deadpan looks and moved on. First class was homeroom. The teacher came waltzing in with a stack of papers, his blonde hair combed back to show off his receding hairline. He smiled wide and greeted the class on his way to the podium. Since you're all third years, he started, it's time for you to think seriously about your future. I'll pass out handouts for your future plans now, but... He picked up the papers from the podium dramatically and smirked. You're all... He threw the handouts behind him, pretty much planning to go to the hero course, right? The class exploded, and by exploded he meant they all started showing off their quirks, half of which were not at all suited for hero work if he were to be honest. What are long fingers, detachable eyeballs and a very thick neck gonna do against a villain? Izuku rolled his eyes and crossed his arms. These bloody idiots. Teach. Kacen started. Don't lump us all in the same group. I'm not gonna be stuck at the bottom with the rest of these rejects. As the rest of the class started protesting, Izuku tried to hide his laughter in his sleeve. The teacher didn't comment on Kaken's trashy attitude, just looked down at his board. Oh, if I remember correctly, you want to go to UA High, right, Bakugo? The class erupted in whispers. U.A? That national school? It was in the top 0.2% this year, you know. Their acceptance rate's always really low too. That's exactly why you guys are just extras. Kacen said loudly and jumped up on his desk. The next half-minute was filled with his narcissistic rambling. Izuku just sat back and looked at the others stare at him with a mix of awe, jealousy, and irritation. The teacher eventually got Kacen to sit back down and went on with the class. Izuku spent the rest of the time staring blankly out the window. He had already chosen a good enough high school that focused on nerdy subjects, a place perfect for him really. He could learn to do code and learn a lot in the scientific subjects so he could become an engineer. Or he could at least get his degree. Getting a job on the other hand, while pretending to be quirkless was a whole other problem for future Izuku. He sat through the rest of the day, bored out of his mind, but then the bell rung after the last class and Kacen came over with 2 of his extras. So, he asked, looking down his nose at Izuku. Have you found a place that is willing to take in someone as useless as you? Izuku tilted his head back, still seated, and lifted a brow. Yeah, your point. Kacen shrugged. I was just thinking how you'd get anybody to accept your application. Shouldn't it be marked with a big red, useless, on it? Izuku sighed. Yeah, you know you're right, he said as he stood and picked up his bag. I'll make sure to write, Bakugo Katsuki says I'm useless and you should totally listen to him because he's the loudest in any room on the front page. Izuku gave them a wave. I'll leave first, so have a great rest of your day. He didn't even care to stick around, just left and went on his merry way. Stupid BS, he grumbled to himself as he exited through the front gates. Now Izuku was just on his way home minding his own bloody business when a villain tried taking over his body. It was daytime so Izuku tried to run but the nasty sewer villain grabbed him and stuffed some of his sewer body in Izuku's mouth. In his mouth. It was beyond disgusting and Izuku couldn't bloody well breathe. The villain was saying something but Izuku couldn't hear it because of the rushing in his ears. Great, Izuku thought, either I take his quirk or I die. But if he took the villain's quirk somebody could have noticed and then Izuku would be in big trouble. Just when Izuku was about to say F it, somebody with a ridiculous hairstyle jumped out of the sewer. It's alright now, young man. The guy boomed and Izuku felt mortified. Hanji All Might had come to save him. How embarrassing. But now he could just play the victim and not lift a finger. At least that was something. I am here. The poster boy took his time to yell instead of getting on with it. Izuku rolled his eyes. Yeah, All Might, we know you are pretty hard to miss, you know. Izuku's vision blurred as All Might finally got a move on. He was about to pass out, in front of the number 1. Great. Then All Might literally blasted the sewer villain and Izuku for that matter. Izuku landed on the road and closed his eyes. Then he felt something big pat his cheek. Hey. He dash. Izuku opened his eyes and glared at Almighty. Could you maybe not? Oh good. Almighty boomed and straightened. Glad you're okay. Why did this guy always sound so overenergetic? Izuku sighed and sat up. Guess that was part of the number 1 job. Sorry about getting you caught up in my villain fighting, he said with a smile. Izuku gave him a deadpan look. Yeah, you better be sorry. I don't usually make mistakes like this. You probably do, you arrogant fool. But I was in high spirits on my day off in a new place. Why should I care? He then laughed. But you were a big help. Thanks. I wasn't, that was the point. I captured him safely. You call that safe? Izuku didn't react like a normal person, and by a normal person he meant the type that would scream and demand an autograph or something. Izuku just got to his feet and listened to All Might's chatter. Well, I need to take this guy to the police, he said when Izuku just stood there. See you again on the other side of the screen. How pretentious could this guy be? Really? Izuku said as sarcastically as possible, but his sarcasm went completely unnoticed. But the daft number 1. Pros are constantly fighting enemies and time, he said as he stretched. And time, huh? That was interesting. Izuku already knew of All Might's fight with All for One 5 years ago and knew that the hero had sustained a lot of damage. Could All Might be dying? Doesn't look like it. Then he wouldn't be able to use his quirk, so perhaps he is losing the ability to handle his own quirk. Maybe him running out of time has something to do with his quirk. Him losing his quirk was much more credible. His quirk probably had a time limit now. It was an interesting theory that Izuku may or may not look into in the future if he got bored. Well then, All Might jumped into the sky, but annoyingly enough Izuku could still hear him when he said, "I'm counting on your continued support." Izuku rolled his eyes again. "You'll have to look elsewhere for that." Izuku shrugged and went on his merry way again. Save the world with a fearless smile? You're it. Now what he hadn't expected was meeting the bloody sewer villain again, and seeing that it had taken Kacen. Was All Might really that incompetent at his job so that he accidentally released the villain again? Death Arms was there with 2 other heroes already, trying to punch a liquid villain, which one could imagine would be a great success. "Don't come near me," the villain yelled threateningly, surrounded by fire. When had that happened? Kacen tried pulling himself from the villain. "I won't let sewage like this swallow me. You little dash." First of all, the villain wasn't little, and second, the massive explosions he set off did nothing at all. Great job, Kacen. It looked like the villain became stronger when he took over someone with a strong quirk and with Kacen's explosive temper. Then Me Lady showed up, but as Izuku had predicted, she didn't work well with small spaces. Kamui rescued Kacen's 2 followers and some other civilians who were too close to the villain. The heroes were scrambling, not knowing what to do. Izuku pulled out his phone and took a pic of Kacen, who was literally in the villain's face. This was hilarious. He had to mask his laughter, a coughing in his shirt. Kacen was probably suffocating like Izuku had been, but he would probably be out of there soon enough, if the heroes would just do their bloody job. But they weren't. Oh, for F's sake. Now he felt bad for laughing. Maybe he could just play it off as being stupid if he went to help. Just looking at it made him want to GG. The fact that All Might hadn't showed up yet proved that Izuku had been right, again. It really was a curse being this smart. So that meant no help from there, and Kacen was still in the villain while the heroes just watched helplessly. Kacen screamed. Izuku put down his bag, pulled out a standard black mask that covered his face from his nose, just in case the villain got any ideas, and ran through the crowd. "Idiot, stop!" Death Arms yelled, but Izuku ignored him. Izuku grabbed a half-burnt crate filled with some half-burnt fruit and threw it at the villain, before the villain could recover Izuku through some other random stuff he found. He jumped on top of the villain and grabbed Kacen. The villain might be liquid, but Kacen wasn't. Izuku smirked when he had successfully pulled Kacen out before the villain could attack him more with Kacen's quirk. "Why are you here?" Kacen yelled. Izuku just glared at him. "To save your sorry butt." He then pushed Kacen off the villain with a bit too much strength than a skinny quirkless kid should have. Whatever. He saw Kacen's eyes widen as he fell, but fortunately Death Arms caught him. Izuku leaned down. "Listen here, you stinky sheet. Put me down and get the F out of here, or I'm gonna make sure you regret being born." He pulled down his mask and smiled at the villain, his thumb right over one of the villain's eyes. "Got it?" The villain nodded and detached himself from Izuku. He used the villain's teeth as a ramp to jump and landed on his feet. The villain retreated quickly into the sewer and was gone. Izuku looked behind him at the stunned crowd and heroes. Kacen was sitting on the ground glaring at everything and everyone like they had personally wronged him. He rolled his eyes and went to grab his bag when Death Arms and Kamui Woods blocked his path. "I'm not sure what I just saw, but that definitely looked like vigilantism," Kamui said. "Yes, we'll have to take you in, kid," Death Arms agreed. "What is vigilantism?" Izuku asked. "What is the definition?" The heroes looked confused, but Kamui still answered. "Using your quirk illegally to fight villains?" He said it like he was unsure. Izuku shrugged. "I'm quirkless, so technically I haven't done anything to break the law." Oh god, their expressions made it 100% worth it. Izuku pulled out his phone and took a quick selfie with the dumbfounded heroes and slipped away before they could say anything else. Katsuki was said. He was so mad that he didn't know what to do. Deku had saved him. Of all people, he had run right up to the Sludge villain with an expression that Katsuki had never seen him wear, and pulled him out of there while the heroes just watched. It was infuriating. And then he just left like it was nothing. A few heroes and reporters had gathered around Katsuki and were praising him for being a weakling. A weakling who got himself captured and used by a villain. "Do you know the student who pulled you out?" a reporter asked. A camera shoved up to his face. Katsuki snapped. He's just a useless nobody. He practically growled and stood up. He had to find Deku and tell him right. He didn't owe these extras anything. One of the heroes, the skinny one with the beak, even had the audacity to say that he wanted Katsuki as his sidekick. Yeah, like I'm gonna be anyone's sidekick. Bloody extra didn't know what he was talking about. Katsuki hadn't been saved, he hadn't needed Deku to step in at all. He had been fine without his help. Deku was wrong. Deku wasn't better than Katsuki, Katsuki was the best, he had always been the best, and Deku had always been Deku. It didn't matter that he had suddenly changed attitude a few years ago, he was still useless. This was probably an elaborate joke the universe was playing on him. Deku couldn't be better than him, just because he had helped him out didn't mean he was better. Deku is looking down at you. He thinks he's better. You're weak. Even a quirkless kid is stronger than you. No. Katsuki shook his head violently. That wasn't right. Katsuki was strong. He was strong enough to help himself. Deku just didn't know it. When he finally caught up with the nerd, he was out of breath. Deku, he yelled as he ran the last distance. The other teen turned to him, his turquoise hair ruffled as it always was. He gave Katsuki an unimpressed one-over and pet a brow at him, as if to ask what he wanted. Katsuki caught his breath and gritted his teeth, rage simmering under his skin. I never asked you for help, he yelled, looking down at his clenched fists. And you didn't help me, he looked up again. Got it? I was fine by myself, you're a dash. Are you sure about that? Deku interrupted. He looked slightly bemused, which angered Katsuki further. Who did Deku think he was? You looked like you needed help though, didn't you? Deku wore a thoughtful look. That villain was choking you, using you, you're right that you didn't ask for my help, but you got it, so shut up and be grateful. Deku glared at him and Katsuki didn't know what to say. He was so angry he was shaking. Don't look down on me, he yelled at Deku, you dim nerd. Deku just shrugged and started walking again. Whatever you say, Kacen, hope to see you never. He gave Katsuki a wave over his shoulder, and Katsuki didn't know what to do. So instead of doing something stupid like punching Deku, he turned around and cursed Deku all the way home. So let me get this straight, Tsukachi said as he pinched the bridge of his nose. You're saying an allegedly quirkless kid saved the hostage from the slug villain while you heroes were standing by uselessly? Kamui rubbed his neck awkwardly. Well, yeah, that's what we're saying. And that same kid slipped through your fingers before you got a name? Death Arms nodded solemnly, while Kamui just said, afraid so. Tsukachi sighed. Can you at least give a description of him? Maybe he goes to the same school as the victim, or else we'll just have to ask, was it Bakugo Katsuki? If he knows him. The two heroes nodded. He had light blue-greenish hair, Death Arms started. More like turquoise, Kamui added. Death Arms nodded. Yeah, and he had green eyes, I think they were darker than his hair at least. Anything else? Tsukachi asked. Well, he was fast, Kamui offered, like really fast and generally just agile. If he hadn't said he was agile, I would have thought he had some kind of enhancing quirk. He could definitely jump higher than the average teenager. Interesting, Tsukachi thought, but why hadn't the kid stayed around? Normally this sort of thing was open and shut in a couple of minutes, and if he really was quirkless? Are we sure that he wasn't just lying? He might have a quirk he's hiding. Death Arms shrugged. Maybe, but I don't think that is the case. It just seemed like he was a strong kid. Tsukachi nodded. I'll see if I can figure out his identity anyway, and check the files for any quirk. He then looked at the heroes and nodded to them. You can go now. Kamui stretched and sighed. Great, it's been a really long day. Death Arms patted him on the back. You'll get used to it in no time, good work. The two heroes took off and Tsukachi was left to search. First he checked out the school where the Bakugo kid goes to, Aldra Junior High. And as if the gods had listened to his prayers for sleep, the answer was ridiculously simple. Because when he looked over the students in that class there was only one boy with turquoise hair, Midoriya Izuku. He didn't really look like much, but Tsukachi knew that appearances could deceive. Still hard to imagine that this skinny kid who was glaring at the camera had charged at a villain. Tsukachi ran his name in the database and came up with his file. as the heroes had said he was marked as quirkless. In that case he technically hadn't committed a crime and they couldn't charge him with anything. It wasn't often that you saw someone exploit that loophole though. But he had to give the kid credit, he was brave to do what he did. When Izuku finally made it home he was ready to just fall into bed for hours. Being around people really drained him. "Izuku, is that you?" his mom called. Izuku trudged to the living room with the same energy of a dead battery. "Hey mom," he said as he poked his head in. His mom was sitting on the couch, a blanket around her with a book. She smiled lovingly when she saw Izuku. "Hi honey, are you hungry? I'll make some food in a bit." Izuku nodded. "Great mom, I'll just go lie down for a bit." His mom just smiled and said that she'd call him when the food was ready. She was probably silently judging him for acting like an 80-year-old but was nice enough to not comment. "That's what I would have done though," Izuku thought to himself as he dragged himself to his room, threw his bag on the floor and fell into bed. Izuku groaned into his pillow. He really didn't like being awake. Having his eyes open all the time seemed like so much work right now. He decided to doze for a bit, but he must have fallen asleep for real, since he first woke up when his mother shook him gently. He woke with a start, sat straight up and knocked his head against Inko's face. "Ow!" He plopped back down on his bed. His mother stood above him, rubbing her forehead. "Good morning to you," she said with laughter in her voice. "Food is almost ready." Izuku nodded. "All right, I'll be out." His mom left and he used the next minutes to try to motivate himself to get up. Then he heard a knock at the door, and his mom yelled to him. If he could get it. Izuku groaned and got up. He opened the door, thinking it would be their neighbor looking for their cat again, but instead it was a tall man with white hair and yellow eyes that gave Izuku pause. The man was looking at him critically and Izuku smiled sheepishly. "Hey Dad." The man took in a deep calming breath. "What the F dash, child?" he asked, sounding as done as Izuku on a Monday morning. Hisashi shouldn't have been surprised when he had seen the news footage. To be honest, he had expected something like this, but not quite so soon. He had told Izuku to be careful about how he acted. He knew it was unfair of him to ask his son to conceal his quirk, but he couldn't afford to be found, and if Izuku's quirk came to light, people would begin to question where it had come from. He had prepared in case Izuku made a mistake and revealed his quirk, but he hadn't been expecting what he had seen. In the video he had seen his son run right up to a villain and rescue his classmate. Izuku hadn't even used his quirk, but he definitely didn't act quirkless. To everyone else it would seem like he either had a quirk to fall back on or like he was insanely stupid. Hisashi had even dropped his fifth coffee of the day on the floor, his favorite mug shattering into pieces, and he had continued to stare dumbly at his son. Something like this would probably get people talking in the underbelly of society, and if word made it to the biggest villain of their time, dear old dad, Hisashi thought bitterly, then Izuku would be in danger. "Are you kidding me?" he had yelled, his voice echoing in his bunker as the hastily taken video played on repeat. It had already gone viral and there were threads of comments where people wondered who the kid was. Unfortunately, that kid was his. Tough luck, the time had come earlier than he would have liked, but there was nothing he could do about it. He would have to go back to Mizurufu and talk to Inko. Hopefully she wouldn't be completely opposed to what Hisashi had in mind. He took out his work phone and messaged his broker that he wouldn't be able to take any more jobs for a while. He then grabbed his keys and hauled butt back home. Him and Izuku were definitely overdue on some father-son time. "I know what you might think, Izuku said, raising his hands in an attempt at placating the very annoyed man who was his father. "But I didn't use my quirk." His dad sighed. "I bloody well know that, Izuku. I saw the DMN footage." Izuku gulped. "It was recorded?" Hisashi looked really annoyed as he flicked Izuku's forehead. "Yeah, it was, and even though you didn't use your quirk, you used your training." Izuku smiled apologetically. "I know it was stupid, but Kacen was choking and apparently All Might is a weakling and the heroes weren't doing anything." He protested to no avail. His father didn't look any more convinced. "Izuku!" His mom called from the kitchen. "Who is at the door?" He saw his father perk up at his mother's voice and tried not to snicker. The small sound that he made didn't escape his father anyways. He shot a weak glare at his son. "We'll talk later, but after dinner go pack some stuff. It's time to complete your training." Izuku shrugged as his dad passed by him and closed the door. He followed Hisashi to the kitchen. Inko was standing with her back to them, humming to herself. It never got old to see the loving expression on his father's otherwise hardened face when he saw Inko. It seemed that the man had a soft spot his mother. Izuku punched him lightly and gestured at his mother. Hisashi nodded and cleared his throat. Inko? It truly was a shame that they couldn't be together more often, Izuku thought as they locked eyes. Inko beamed and ran into his father's arms. Hisashi! What a lovely surprise! When did you come back to Japan? Hisashi was smiling, Inko was smiling. It was way too loving and caring to Izuku's taste, but it was still nice that his parents loved each other. They really looked like opposites though, his mother with her colorful hair and his father with his colorless hair. Not to mention that Inko looked just as happy and optimistic as Hisashi looked angry and irritated. I just came back a few hours ago, but I had some business to take care of before coming here. Business that probably had nothing at all to do with the sludge stuck to the soles of his shoes, Izuku thought smugly. His father had probably gone to have a word with a certain sewer villain. Well, sit down, eat, Inko said pleasantly as she rushed them to the dinner table. Hisashi sat down at the head of the table that usually just stood empty while Inko grabbed some more cutlery and tableware. Izuku sat down a bit awkwardly. When are you gonna tell her then? He asked. Hisashi groaned. I have no bloody idea. She seems really happy. So how am I gonna tell her? His father said in despair. Izuku chuckled. His father was unnaturally soft for a person in his line of work. Well, it's not like I'm going to be gone forever, Izuku said with a shrug. His dad looked at him as if to say, well obviously but that doesn't matter, and buried his head in his hands. A bit dramatic, not gonna lie. Good thing I don't have someone I love like that. His mother came over with the last pan, this one containing rice, and Izuku finally realized that it was Kacen. It was like all his worries and troubles were washed away as his mouth flooded with salvia. Yes, he thought as he filled his plate and began digging in. He was too preoccupied with choking himself on the food that he didn't at first realize when his father began talking. Best that I teach him to defend himself properly, just in case? His mom looked a bit troubled and she was fidgeting. Hisashi looked like it hurt him a bit to say it, big softer really. Izuku also didn't want to leave his mother alone, but if it meant getting out of school for a while then say less. You always knew the risk, Inko. If all for one learns about Izuku and he isn't able to fight then, he let the last bit hang in the air. It will only be for a couple of months, Hisashi continued. I'll protect him until he can protect himself, I promise. Inko laid her hand on her husband's. I know you will, honey, and I think it's a good idea. More importantly though, she said and turned to Izuku. What the hell were you doing? She didn't yell, but she didn't need to yell. She sounded pretty mad without having to raise her voice. Oh boy, I'm an idiot, Izuku thought to himself, shrinking back in his chair. I know it was stupid, he admitted, but I can't bloody well do anything about it now, can I? His parents looked at him like they were ready to off themselves, but he just smiled innocently and stood up. I'll just go pack, he said as he backed out of the room. Going by how tough last time had been, these next couple of months were probably gonna be shitty as hell, since it was most likely gonna be harder. By a lot probably. My life, and that's why you don't rescue angry blondes. Deku didn't come to school the next day, he didn't come to school for the week either, and it annoyed the hell out of Katsuki. Where was that diamond nerd? Did he think that he was better than all the other extras? That he didn't need an education? Did he think he was better than Katsuki? Some of the extras were saying that maybe he had killed himself or something, which Katsuki found absurd. Deku never gave up, that was something he had learned back when they were kids. The nerd was as persistent as he was annoying, and he couldn't imagine Deku ever doing something like killing himself. Katsuki took his feet off the table and grabbed his bag. He was gonna find that nerd and figure out what was going on. He trudged up to the teacher's desk. Oi, where's Deku? He asked, a bit less aggressively than he would to others. The man might be an idiot, but he was still Katsuki's teacher, sensei, whatever. The man looked up at him and gave a friendly smile. Bakugo! Are you doing all right? Do you need anything? Katsuki huffed. Do you know where Deku is? He said again, growing impatient. Oh, Izuku? The teacher frowned. I think he dropped out. What? He dropped out? He half yelled. Why'd he go do that? The teacher shrugged. I have none in the slightest. Was there anything else you needed help with? Katsuki practically growled at him and stormed off. Did that nerd really think that he could do that? Katsuki decided that he was going to get to the bottom of this, find the nerd and demand that he tell Katsuki what the hell he was thinking. He ditched the extras who always followed him around, saying he had something to do, and then he trudged all the way over to Deku's house or apartment, whatever. Katsuki reminded himself to act with some semblance of politeness, since Inko was friends with the hag, before he knocked. I'm coming, somebody called from inside, as Katsuki heard steps and then the nerd's mother opened the door. Oh Katsuki! What a nice surprise, if you're here for Izuku then dash. Katsuki pet his head. Where is he anyway? He interrupted. He hasn't been to school for a week. Inko looked surprised for a second, then she smiled sadly. Oh, he's gone to live with his father in America, for a bit. He'll probably be back in time to start high school. Katsuki was left gaping. America, some months later. Why are we doing this again? Izuku complained, as he tried to keep up with his father. It had gotten easier, as he had been steadily building up muscle for some time now, but it's still essy. His father turned his head to look at him fondly from the rocky perch he stood on. It's good practice, Izuku, and these daily walks clear the head from a day inside. Izuku scoffed. Walks? Are you kidding me? Are you really calling a 5-mile-long trek through the mountains a walk? At that point he wanted to murder his father. Committing patricide, or whatever it's called, sounded really appealing then. He had literally fallen off a cliff on one of their walks, and gotten chased by a bear and broken a rib and so on and so on. These walks were a never-ending story of misery. It took hours and they did it every bloody day, after an already full day of training indoors. They scaled cliffs and dug their way through snow and mud. Father-son time, as Hisashi liked to call it, was Izuku's favorite time of the day. Izuku slipped and fell headfirst into the snow. Or maybe not. It is a walk Izuku, his father called above the wind, and if your mom asks it was definitely 100% safe. Izuku laughed. Yeah no, I'm gonna tell her you tried to kill me, see if you survive that old man. Hisashi huffed a cloud of flames. Your mother is a very kind and gentle woman, Izuku. She wouldn't hurt me. An uncertain look overtook his face. Well, she probably wouldn't kill me at least. Well, we're almost back anyway, he then said and picked up the pace. Izuku groaned, but his father ignored him. I'm pretty sure your almost doesn't match my almost, he called. And how does this even bloody help? Do you really think All for One is gonna threaten me with long walks in the wilderness? Hisashi sighed. Going by my childhood, then it's possible. You never know with that man, and I have to prepare you for everything. Why prepare me for everything? Why train me like a bloody super soldier if potentially I'll not get to use those skills? It didn't make sense. I could go all my life without All for One having an inkling about it. All for One would probably keep doing what he was doing for long after my death without even knowing I had existed. That was a depressing thought, since his grandfather was in the visual state of a mushed potato, or so he had heard. Live and die without doing anything. What kind of life was that? Always looking over your shoulder for an enemy who didn't even know he existed. Izuku dragged himself the rest of the way to the compound. The first time he had done this he had marveled at the view and the sheer size and beauty of their surroundings. Made them seem like insignificant ants, but who cared anyways? Not Izuku, he just wanted to fall into bed and eat some of those rotten beans that seemed to be the only thing in abundance at the compound. He shed all his outer layers as soon as he got inside and hung them up to dry on the racks. You hungry? His father asked as Izuku passed him. Izuku shrugged. Yeah whatever, he said, waving his hand. Your cooking is shit though. I don't think heating instant ramen can be considered cooking, Hisashi pointed out helpfully. That just proves my point further. Izuku shot back and slammed his bedroom door and fell into bed, asleep before he even touched the pillow. This was really becoming a habit for him. Not that he got much rest since his dad woke him up about 20 minutes later. And by woke him up, he means he got kicked off the bed by his loving father. Izuku groaned. The floor was really cold. Was that necessary? He asked and looked up. Hisashi handed him a bowl. I had my hands full, he used as an excuse. Izuku glared at him. The father figure really fits you, you know, he said sarcastically. Hisashi. narrowed his eyes at his son, slurping some noodles into his mouth. I didn't really have the best example to follow, you know, having the number one villain as your dad wasn't exactly what one would call an ordinary childhood. Yeah, Izuku said, drawing out the word, sure, then started digging in. After a while of them just eating, Izuku thinking and Hisashi not thinking at all, Izuku figured that he would ask the question he had been itching to ask. So, he started, swiping the back of his hand over his mouth, Dad, I've been meaning to ask. What was your mother's quirk? Hisashi swallowed a mouthful of noodles and soup, looking thoughtful. I think it was a weak healing quirk or something, I can't really remember. Who did you get the fire-breathing quirk from then? Hisashi paused his search for the noodles who were probably waiting in the bottom of the bowl. I was actually born quirkless, Hisashi confessed. The fire-breathing quirk belonged to one of my father's associates, but then the dragon, as he called himself, did something that All for One didn't like, so he gave the quirk of one of the most dangerous criminals in the underground to his quirkless son. Okay, wow, that was interesting. Izuku was left speechless. What did you even say to that? I'm sorry? A lot of people had told him sorry while thinking he was quirkless. He decided to just say, okay then. Izuku still wanted to know what had happened between his father and grandfather and how his father had ended up a bloody mercenary, but that could wait to another day, since all they really had out here was time to train and beans to eat. And snow, of course, there was an abundance of that. Izuku and Hisashi had made a bet. To motivate him, or whatever, the bet was that they would stop trekking through the mountains daily when Izuku beat Hisashi in close combat. With no weapons, he had to get his father knocked down. To be honest, it didn't go all that well in the beginning. It was mostly just him getting his butt handed to him. But then he got a few punches in and then he got his father on the defensive. It was satisfying getting better and closer to his goal, but in the meantime he was stuck with the extra calming exercise, as his father put it. Sorry to say, but it wasn't very calming to get dragged down the mountain in an avalanche, trying not to get killed. His dad sure had some weird opinions on what was fun to do. But fine, he would go along with what the old goat wanted. That description was actually fairly accurate since his father literally had yellow eyes and white hair, or at least that was what Izuku thought. But as he said, he was getting stronger and taller. Apparently he had hit his growth spurt in the mountains. His dad seemed to become less of a looming figure as the months passed, and the goal to beat him didn't seem so unreachable anymore. In the meantime, they had fallen into a routine of training while also getting closer. They had never known each other that well, since Hisashi hadn't been there for most of his childhood and just being constantly busy. He didn't really hold it against Hisashi though. He could understand how it would be complicated to settle down with a family while constantly being on the run. So Izuku didn't mind getting to know him. His father was actually okay. He was a very collected and hardworking person, but he didn't take anything too serious, which was the best about him. Izuku really detested people who made a big deal out of small technicalities. They almost had the same humor. His father's were just sometimes a bit cringe and outdated, but that was just a given. The man does spend most of his time in a bunker on the top of a mountain. But despite what he sometimes said, Hisashi really cared for him and his mother for that matter. He had a picture of her on his desk and probably more in his room. Izuku wouldn't be surprised at least. Just the fact that he had taken off work for this long to train Izuku was downright touching when you took into consideration how big of a workaholic he is. All this training, of course, was what led to his most recent success. Because on day 247, yes, Izuku has counted the days, even made tallies on his wall like if he were in prison because why not? He finally knocked his father to the floor. It was so bloody satisfying to see the shock in his eyes when he hit the mat hard, and then the pride in his eyes after he had processed that Izuku had just flipped him. Izuku laughed breathlessly. "Take that, Dad," he said and stuck out his tongue. Hisashi chuckled and got to his feet. "You finally got me, problem child," he said and ruffled Izuku's hair. "You bet I did. No more bloody walks." Hisashi got a sad look in his eyes. "You won the bet fair and square, so I'll give you that, but can I convince you to go to the top of the mountain with me one last time? It can be in celebration that you never have to do it again." Izuku was sitting on the ground panting and victorious. He nodded to his father. "Yes, sure, but just this once. This is not becoming a tradition." The sun was slowly setting as they trekked up the mountain for, supposedly, the last time. His steps felt lighter than they had ever before, and for once he fully enjoyed the walk. He could navigate much better now, so he didn't slip and fall. His thighs didn't even ache by the time they reached the top. The wind was cold up here and it whipped around them, but Izuku didn't mind it. He sat down on a rocky outcrop and looked down the way they had come. It really was beautiful. The mountain was thousands of feet and at the foot lay a big glittering lake. His father sat down next to him with a sigh. It really is something, huh? Izuku clicked his tongue. You should take mom here sometime. Hisashi smiled. Yeah, she'd like that. His father then turned to Izuku. I think your training is coming to an end. You are almost as good as me now. Izuku frowned and looked away, the wind tearing long strands of his hair out from the knot he had it in. It had grown a lot since he had come here and he hadn't bothered to cut it. And he sure as hell wasn't letting his father within a feet of him with a pair of scissors. Yeah, no way. This was so I could defend myself if he finds me, wasn't it? He asked and saw his father nod from the corner of his eye. But what if he wasn't a threat anymore? Izuku continued, not looking at his father. We could be a family, you wouldn't have to live on this mountain. He voiced the thought that had plagued him for weeks. No years. I'm sure All Might will defeat him eventually. His father said. Izuku shook his head. I don't think he can. All Might's quirk has a time limit now. Hisashi turned to him with a shocked expression and Izuku continued. The Sludge villain attacked me first in a very secluded area. All Might showed up and captured him, but the idiot must have accidentally let the villain go, but he didn't show up to correct his mistake. Time limit, Hisashi mumbled. In that case he must have sustained some real damage during his last fight with All for One. It is entirely possible. I mean, All for One isn't the #1 villain for anything. Izuku nodded. Yeah, he was a bit nervous to pose his next question, but it had to be said. What if I destroyed All for One? To be honest, it was more of a statement than a question. He had thought about it a lot since he'd come to this mountain. Hisashi grabbed his shoulders in a tight grip. Izuku, no, you can't. Izuku shrugged off his grip angrily. I can, that's the bloody point. There's no one better than me for this. Hisashi glared at him. He practically growled in frustration. That's not your rotting job. Let the bloody heroes deal with the villain. Do you want to be with Mom or not? Izuku snapped. It's only gonna happen if All for One is out of the picture and you know it. Fighting him is what I've trained for. I can do it. Hisashi sighed. I know you're strong. You've been keeping me on my toes for days already. Not to mention you have the quirk for it. But I don't want you to do it. Your mom would kill me. His voice was losing the conviction. He knew Izuku was right. When I return to Mizudafu, take Mom here. You can't honestly think I'll let you face him alone, his father said pointedly. I do. You'll protect Mom, and I'll take down All for One. If you don't, I won't be able to focus solely on him. I'll worry for Mom too. His father looked pained, like he had been looking for a reason that proved that it was a bad idea but had come up with nothing. After a few long moments he sighed and nodded slowly. Yeah, okay, fine, but then I have some more things I have to show you. He smiled sharply at Izuku, and Izuku saw, maybe for the first time, the side of him that was the vicious mercenary Citron. Izuku looked out at the setting sun and smiled. Now he just needed to figure out how the hell he was going to kill the #1 villain. But that was a problem for later. After they had returned to the compound, the real training had begun. It was much more intense and exhausting, but in the end it was worth it. His father sped through teaching him how to use a gun, wield knives in close range and long range, and use a bow staff. He did have a strong quirk, but the wise words his father had bestowed upon him, "It would be bloody stupid to only rely on your quirk, you idiot," were right. He also had to collect some quirks before he could properly use it. Not to mention he had to learn how to use the quirks. Some of the quirks he had stolen before had come to him naturally, but some others had him returning it as fast as he could. Yeah, I'm talking about you, guy with scaly skin quirk that had made me itch for days. He knew that, morally or ethically, stealing quirks were a bad thing, but then again, there were some people who just shouldn't have quirks. He would have to find some villains to take from, and if he had to he could maybe borrow quirks. Izuku shook his head at himself. Yeah, right, like anyone would willingly give up their quirk. That's fine, he knew no one would be lining up to help him, but whatever, then he just had to roam the streets at night like he used to and hope to catch a villain in the act. Hopefully someone with a useful quirk. He knew that when he began collecting quirks there were probably going to be more than a few people who picked up on it. All for one's enemies and allies. That was going to be fun, he thought. So to put it simply, the sheet he was planning was dangerous and a bit suicidal. He would be surrounded by potential enemies until he had defeated all for one. But as the optimist he was, he tried to look at the bright side of things. Surprise, there isn't one. But it was good to be back. He had gotten pretty tired of his father's company and the stillness. He definitely liked the activity and noise of the city better. It had been over a month since their talk on the mountain, and Izuku had just arrived at his new base of operations. Hisashi had picked up his mom and they had shared a heartfelt, "Hello, I haven't seen you for months, goodbye, you will have to wait longer, but you have this albino of a husband to keep you company." It was really something that brought tears to one's eyes, except Izuku, who had perfected his poker intimidating face. He had to show a strong front and all that. But as he said, he had arrived at his base of operations, a medium-sized apartment with 2 rooms, bathroom, kitchen and dining living room. He was probably going to use the extra room as a armory or something since it would be a real bother to have a roommate. There was also a terrace which was nice. He had grown accustomed to fresh air and a constant breeze through the cold-as-hell compound, so of course the first thing he did was open the doors. He unpacked all his stuff, which consisted of a lot of weapons, multiple suits. His was a basic no-sleeve top with a turtleneck, cargo pants and a long jacket with dark green lining and a hood, all black and covered in flexible armor. That all made him look positively emo, which he didn't mind. The whole point was so he could blend in with the night. There were 2 holsters for guns that were hidden under the jacket, and the pants had multiple places for knives and other useful stuff like smoke bombs. He also had some leather holsters for his forearms that kinda looked like what knights would wear in old movies. His were just leather and black, of course. Now all that was left was for him to start, and what better time than the present? He had unpacked, his system was up and running, and he had even eaten. Given it was just instant ramen he had brought from the compound, but it did its job. He pulled on his outfit, that he really didn't know what to call, since he wasn't a hero or a villain or a vigilante for that matter. He didn't really know how to categorize himself, and it really didn't matter. He was a vigilante because he stopped some villains, but he could also be seen as a villain because he stole quirks. It was all very confusing, to be honest. So after mulling it over, all the way outside and onto the road, he decided he could just call it his work clothes. But that didn't make sense either because Izuku shook his head violently. It didn't bloody matter. Focus, Izuku. He perched on the corner of a building and looked over the city. The moon was high on the sky, its light almost suffocated by dark clouds. No stars were seen, probably because of light pollution. The city's lights were like gemstones in every color imaginable, from signs, traffic lights and windows. There was so much activity compared to in the mountains, so much life. He breathed it in as he crouched there. All he had to do now was wait. Apparently he didn't have to wait for too long, since about 5 minutes later he heard a scream. Izuku sprang into action and moved over the rooftops in the direction it had come from. When he met gaps that he couldn't clear by himself, he used a grappling hook. He would have to find a quirk that could help him with that later. A few villains were running through the streets and they had taken a hostage. Yeah, that was a big no-no. Izuku jumped from the roof and landed right in front of them. He pulled out his 2 guns and aimed. The tranquilizer bullets took the first one out easily. The hostage ran away crying, from the now sleeping villain. The other villains noticed this and veered back, 2 hiding behind a car, and the last one dragged the guy Izuku had already knocked unconscious into an alley. Those 2 can wait. Izuku smiled and cracked his knuckles. One of the guys behind the car tried attacking him with gusts of air, which was wholly ineffective. If that quirk was a bit stronger, it could be really effective. The other guy was actually a girl and had a mutation quirk like most villains and was probably better at close combat. The discrimination against people with mutation quirks were actually really bad, and Izuku could understand why so many of them turned to villainy. Her hair seemed to be made of iron rods or something like that. Right now they were standing, so she kinda looked like a hedgehog. Izuku put his guns away and ran at them, using the car they were hiding behind as a ramp to jump over them. He turned in the air and hit ground right in front of the 2 stunned villains. The guy then blasted him away with a much stronger air manipulation quirk, and Izuku slammed into and through a storefront. Had he held out on him? The audacity! He stood up and righted the mannequin he had knocked down, though the dress sat a bit crooked now. He brushed off the shattered glass on him, apologized to the stricken store owner, and walked out the way he had come. The two villains had joined the other twin the alley, and there were some late-night spectators now. He ignored them and pursued. "Is that a hero?" someone in the crowd asked loudly. Izuku just heard someone say no before he was out of earshot. He caught up with the villains and kicked the one with the weird hair to the ground. The others turned around, deciding that fighting would be easier than escaping. 3-on-1? How unfortunate for them. Izuku grinned and ducked as the guy with a metal helmet mask thingy lunged at him. "You know, I won't be taking that quirk either," he thought. Then he was blasted back by 5 small projectiles that had apparently come from the guy's fingers. Yeez, he couldn't seem to catch a break. He grabbed the guy's wrist and threw him to the ground and knocked him out. He then zeroed in on the guy with the quirk he wanted and charged. The guy had taken over the job of carrying their friend but dropped the other guy when Izuku approached and tried running. Izuku shot him in the foot and saw him drop. He touched his hand to the guy's exposed throat and took his quirk. Izuku would probably have better use of it, anyways. He then left the villains, not caring whether they were arrested or if they just picked themselves up and crawled back into the hole they had come from. Izuku found his way back to one of the streets, this one near abandoned. He was about to get back to the roof when he came to a stop in an alley where a mugging was happening. A guy encased in shadows was threatening another guy who looked panicked. But when the mugger demanded the guy's money, he sounded almost desperate. Maybe I should try being non-violent with this one. Izuku approached, his footsteps not sounding at all, a trick Hisashi had learned him, and came to a stop beside the mugger. He cleared his throat and the guy flinched away from him. He was wearing a mask like he had back with the Sludge villain, and his hood was up so they couldn't see his face. "Hi," he greeted. "Care if I join your little gathering?" "Sitting on the roof looking for villains would be such a drag," he said, whining the last word. The mugger looked at him stupidly. "Huh?" The mugger was practically wearing rags, his clothes were worn and threadbare, not to mention all the holes. He was probably living on the street, Izuku thought. The other guy was wearing expensive flashy brands, his entire outfit just screamed wealthy, to the point where Izuku thought that it was kinda his own fault for going around in this kind of neighborhood looking like that. And no, Izuku definitely wouldn't think the same if it was RPE, instead of a mugging. That would be one of the only times one shouldn't take what he said as sarcasm. Izuku rolled his eyes and looked at the guy getting mugged, who also looked very confused. "Wow, you guys are so boring." The mugger wasn't fighting him at all. The shadows twirling around him had actually died down a bit. "Get out of here," Izuku told the other guy and pointed at the mugger. "I need a word with this one." The guy nodded and ran out of the alley. "Okay then," Izuku said and leaned against the brick wall, crossing his arms. "So what's your quirk?" The mugger looked young, but he had gray hair and bags under his eyes that could rival Hisashi's. He looked like he was 17 or maybe 16, basically just a kid, but then again, Izuku was just a kid too if you thought about it. The guy gritted his teeth. That guy was using his money carelessly in a bar a street from here. He didn't need them. "That's not what I asked." The guy looked a bit embarrassed then. "My quirk is Shadow Storm, all right?" he said angrily. "Now PS is off." Izuku hummed. "Is it just shadows or do they do anything?" The guy looked ready to slap Izuku, but he was standing between the guy and the exit and Izuku was obviously bigger. "It's just shadows, okay?" "Shadows and a boatload of nightmares." Izuku regarded the guy. He was skinny, too skinny, and he looked like he could fall over at any moment. "You said he didn't need it," Izuku said. "Does that mean you do?" The guy flinched and took a step back. He looked at Izuku suspiciously, then let out a frustrated sound. "Yes, I do, okay? Now will you let me leave?" He started walking, but Izuku held his hand out. "What if we made a deal?" he said. Mugger guy tensed. "I don't do that anymore, so if Izuku sighed. This guy was clearly not thinking the same thing as he was. "You said you got nightmares from your quirk, yes?" The guy looked confused again. "Yes," he said, sounding uncertain. "Then how about you sell me your quirk?" "I mean, the least I could do was help him out a bit for taking his quirk." "What?" Izuku shrugged. "You heard me. How would that even work?" "None of your business, but it would." and you can either get paid or get robbed for it. The guy gulped and began retreating. So I would be quirkless? He said, sounding panicked. Izuku just stared at him. Yeah. The guy seemed to think about it, and after some long moments he seemed to calm down. How much? How much do you need? 100,000 yen. They stared at each other, and Izuku cracked a smile that the guy couldn't see. Fine then, he said and approached the guy who despite all his talk was shaking pretty bad. It's okay, Izuku soothed as he touched the guy's shoulder. The guy's eyes fluttered shut and he went limp. Izuku held him up. This way it was at least a little fair. He knew villains didn't become villains for nothing. After all, this guy didn't even seem like he had liked threatening another person. He carried the guy to the roof and left him for a bit while he went to get the money. He then left the guy with 500,000 yen and a note where he had written, "Get on your feet." It wasn't like Izuku lacked money. He was literally funded by an international hitman, so he didn't see the harm in helping this guy a bit. Who knows? He might even do something more with his life than mugging people now. Hopefully he would get some new clothes at least, and a job wouldn't hurt either, but what he used the money for was ultimately up to him. Maybe he would find the same guy in an alley again next week trying to mug someone else. Or maybe he wouldn't. You never knew. Izuku found a bunch of other villains that night and several more nights after that. He only found a few useful quirks, but at least he was making progress. After all, he would need a full arsenal if he was going to take on dear old granddad. Tsukachi sat stunned while he was being briefed on a new vigilante that had popped up sometime last week. Did you just say that some of the villains left at the scenes were missing their quirks? He asked numbly. The officer nodded. Yes, but no mutant-type quirks has been stolen. We don't know exactly how or why, but we have gotten some descriptions of the vigilante. They all say that he's tall, around 6 feet, some say 6 feet 1. He apparently wears a long coat with the hood always drawn and a black mask that covers half his face. Witnesses to the takedown say that he's really fast and agile, but that there was no sign of a emitter or transformation quirk, so it is a possibility that he has a mutation quirk that enhances his performance or something like that. She sighed deeply. Some journalists have already picked up on it and are calling him the thief or the devil's apprentice, she scoffed, then lifted a brow at the file. I mean, they both kind of fit since he steals quirks somehow, or at least makes the host unable to use them, and there's that urban legend from a few decades ago. The officer closed the rapport and frowned when she looked at Tsukachi. Are you all right, sir? You look a bit pale. You would too if you knew that that urban legend is no legend at all, he thought as he nodded. Yeah, I'm fine, just a slight headache. You're dismissed. The officer bowed slightly and went back to her own work. Tsukachi turned back to his desk and tried to calm himself. He looked up the thief on a few forums until he found a shakily taken video. No, that was definitely not all for one. That guy, if he was even still alive, would be much too damaged to move like that. The figure in the video was surrounded by a black smoke that might be one of his quirks and was moving insanely fast. Tsukachi couldn't even see how the thief had knocked the villains unconscious when he slowed the footage down. It might not be all for one, but this was still very bad. A younger all for one with insane skills and more than a few quirks. Christ, that is not someone you wanted to be facing in the field. But that was what heroes were for, Tsukachi reminded himself, for these kinds of guys. He scrolled a bit through some of the comments and a discussion caught his attention. Anonymous Noddle 123. Don't know why everybody out here criticizing the thief so much. I mean, he's making the city safer. So why are you all complaining? He's a hero if you ask me. H3off3r433. At Anonymous Noddle 123, he's literally stealing quirks. They might be villains, but it's still not right. That's something a villain would do, not a vigilante. Anonymous Noddle 123. At H3off3r433, who cares? They're villains. The only thing they do is cause trouble. H3off3r433. At Anonymous Noddle 123, it's not ethically correct. Just because they're villains doesn't give the thief the right to cripple them. Anonymous Noddle 123. At H3R3R43V, I smell quirkless discrimination. The discussion went on, with the other trying to defend himself. Tsukachi sighed. Of course this guy would raise debate. This discussion was a perfect example on the two views there were of him. One side thinking that the villains having no quirks to wreak havoc with was a good thing, and the other side being wholly convinced that it was inhumane. Tsukachi could see their point. He himself would probably lose a lot of his value if he didn't have his quirk. It was a sad but true fact that one had to have a quirk for a lot of things in life. Some jobs people were actually required to have a quirk that could help them in their work. That was part of the reason anyone with a water or fish-related quirk most likely would end up working at the docks. Same goes for analyzing or intelligence quirks. Those would most likely secure an important position. Tsukachi scrolled on. Some people were discussing what his quirk could be and how the hell he affected the villains as he did. Some said that it was probably just temporary and people were freaking out for nothing. At least it wasn't all for one, and at least it was only villains. That had been the reason it had taken this long for anybody to pick up on it. But the media had apparently still been quicker than the police force. Embarrassing, really. Some saw him as a villain, but some saw him as a vigilante, a hero even. But that didn't change the fact that they had to deal with this as fast as possible with the least media coverage as possible. Tsukachi had to contact Yagi. Izuku was getting tired of being watched. He had noticed the man with the purple blazer a long time ago, but it seemed that the guy was hesitant to actually approach. It hadn't taken long for the guy to track him down. Izuku was impressed, if he was being honest. The sun had gone down hours ago and he was sitting on the edge of a building, his legs dangling over the edge, watching the city. The purple blazer guy had come up about half an hour ago but just stood at the door like he had any chance of making a quick escape if things went south. He had been smoking all this time, one cigarette after the other, and if they were going to wait until he finished the whole pack they would be there all night, and Izuku had things to do. So, Izuku called, "What do you want now that you've tracked me down?" He heard the guy scoff and the sound of him approaching. Right to the point, eh? Izuku turned his head a bit to get a better look at the guy. Gray hair, missing front tooth, white dress shirt, glasses with a round frame, and a constant cigarette. His father had told him that he should look out for the broker, that he would probably try to hire him for something. His father had said to refuse no matter what, but Izuku figured that it would be easier to find all for one if he had some contacts that were villains. If he had acted more villain-like than a vigilante would, it was for this purpose exactly. It wasn't that hard, Jiren said. The thief only comes out a few hours after dark and you usually start the night around this area. The thief? Is that what they were calling him? I mean, they're not technically wrong. When Izuku didn't say anything, Jiren chuckled. There's a big job coming up with some new players that are calling themselves the League of Villains. Izuku remained silent. I mean, it's a good pay, Jiren continued. How many people are they hiring? He asked. Jiren scoffed. As many as they can apparently. They plan to attack a hero school. Izuku looked at him with narrowed eyes. New players, you say? I'm a new player myself, so how do you know I won't snitch? The broker puffed his cigarette and smirked. No one trusts no one these days. Rightly so, Izuku commented. But if they're hiring so many people they must have some wealthy backers, he said, trying to gather information. Yeah, apparently the guy is a big player or something, the point being that he's loaded and willing to hire any muscle out there. Izuku hummed, a big player, huh? If he was insanely lucky this guy would be all for one, but he didn't really think that that could be the case. It wouldn't hurt to take a look around though. I want to meet them, the leader of this League of Villains. Can that be arranged? He tried imitating the voice his dad used when Izuku had eaten all the Pocky that Hisashi was only able to get once a month. It seemed like it worked since Jiren nodded almost immediately. Yeah, sure, I can pull some strings I suppose, he said while rubbing the back of his neck. Izuku smiled behind his mask. He slipped out a piece of paper from a pocket in his jacket and in one smooth movement he was standing right in front of Jiren, who instinctively took a step back. Izuku held out the small piece of paper and Jiren took it, looking only slightly confused. Call or text me on this number when you've set a place and time. Jiren nodded. Yes, of course. Izuku patted him on the shoulder as he walked past. Get home safe, Jiren. He heard the sound of the man shuffling his feet, which probably meant that he was looking at Izuku's back wondering how he had gotten his name. Yagi was excited. The entrance exam was coming up and he could finally get a look at the potential first years he was going to teach. He had already been in Japan for almost a year, scouting for a successor. Mirai's student Mirio seemed like a good choice, but Yagi wanted to make sure that the quirk was passed on to the right person, so he had visited Mirai's agency and talked with Mirio a few times and had only gotten good expressions. The young man was definitely up to the task of being the new symbol, just going by his goal to save 1,000,000 people. Yagi would pass on the flames soon, when they went back to school, so he could use his last year learning how to utilize one for all. Mirio already had a quirk that he had honed to perfection with the help of Mirai, but when added super strength to that, he could truly be a worthy symbol. Yagi sighed. It was about time he joined the other heroes in fighting crime, but only for a few hours. His time limit had gotten shorter and shorter ever since his fight with One for All, and that meant that even when he became a teacher, he only had one class a day. Which was perfectly fine, but Yagi was still frustrated that he couldn't do more. He was about to get up and put on his hero costume when the doorbell rang. He frowned. He was not expecting anyone. He walked to the door where the screen for the actual front door downstairs was showing that it was Tsukachi. Yagi sighed, relieved that he didn't have to use any of the precious time in his muscle form to receive a house call. He opened the door for him and waited as he climbed the stairs. "Tsukachi! What a nice surprise," he said, a little less enthusiastic as he would have in his muscle form, but a lot more genuine. Tsukachi smiled, dark circles under his eyes showing that he probably hadn't had any sleep. "Hello, Yagi. I'm afraid it isn't pleasant things that bring me." Yagi frowned. "In that case, I'll make some coffee." Tsukachi sat down at the dining table as Yagi brewed some of the strongest coffee he had. He sat down and passed a cup to the detective. "What is it then?" Tsukachi sighed deeply and buried his head in his hands. Yagi waited patiently for his friend to be ready to say whatever he came to say. "There's a new vigilante on the streets," he said into his hands and then looked up at Yagi. He took a sip of his coffee before he continued, "And some of the villains he has taken down has lost their quirks while fighting him." Yagi coughed up some blood at that. "What?" Tsukachi nodded solemnly. "I have deduced that it isn't all for one, but it must be someone with his quirk or a variation of his quirk." "How is this possible?" "That's what I was coming to ask you," Tsukachi answered, sounding even more tired. "The vigilante has only targeted villains so far, but he must have some relation to All for One." Yagi nodded. "We have to find this vigilante then, and if he truly is against villains, then maybe he'll tell us if he knows whether or not All for One actually perished during our fight 5 years ago." Tsukachi nodded. "I think we'll need to get some underground heroes on this as well, since the vigilante only shows at night and we should like to keep this out of the media. He also has tremendous skill besides his quirk." Yagi nodded, but then tensed when he realized who was the most prominent underground hero, though only because of his teaching position at UA. Yagi felt dread wash over him. "We'll need a racer on this, won't we?" Tsukachi nodded. "That would be the wisest choice because of his quirk, so I would say yes." Yagi groaned. "Then how do you propose we get him to help?" Tsukachi shrugged. "He's a hero, he'll do his job." Yagi couldn't argue with that. Even if someone he greatly disliked, like Yagi, asked him to help take down a villain, he would probably do it anyways because he was a hero. That was what Yagi hoped for at least. Izuku was baking cupcakes when he got the text. An unknown number had sent an address and a time just like Izuku had asked for. Jiren had worked relatively fast considering that it was only yesterday they had met on the roof of that building. The text said to come that same day at 9 p.m., which was fine for him. It wasn't like he was doing much, he could go out after the meeting. As Jiren had said, he did tend to start the night in that particular area, so he would have to break that habit. If a bloody broker could find him this easily, it wasn't looking good. Consistency is dangerous, Izuku, it makes you easy to find. That was one of the first bloody things the old man had told him. For God's sake, maybe he should listen. And then there was the problem of him starting school soon, which was pretty bothersome, since he wouldn't be able to sleep till 3 p.m. any longer. But that was fine, he decided he could always take longer naps in the afternoon. "Yeah, I'm a total grandpa, I know." He would figure it out when that time came, but until then he was happy with his long nights of walking around, scouting for quirks, and his big brunch in the afternoon. It would probably be smartest for him to arrive in his vigilante work outfit. Izuku groaned. "Okay, fine. I look more like an assassin from Assassin's Creed than anything else." And yes, it was Hisashi's interest in pre-quirk games that had also made him addicted to playing Minecraft. That guy was bound to have some interesting hobbies considering he lived in permanent isolation, and now it had rubbed off on me. Now that Izuku thought about it, Wasn't all for one from that time PRD? Oh god, he had picked up a habit from his father who probably picked it up from his father as well. He didn't really mind though. Pre-Quirk era games were more fun because they didn't all revolve around heroes fighting villains. Izuku rolled his eyes. The creators really didn't have any imagination nowadays. Izuku looked up the location as he waited for the cupcakes to be fully baked. It was in a shady area of town, which he had already expected it would be. He didn't really know if villains stayed in shabby places because they were all broke or just because of the aesthetic. These guys had no excuse since their funder was, as Jiren had said, loaded. But fine whatever, they could do what they wanted to, Izuku wouldn't judge. Areas like that was actually pretty practical to live in because one could just blend in. Places like that were always overpopulated and cramped. The only downside was that it was a predictable choice. Izuku took out the cupcakes from the oven. The whole apartment already smelled like vanilla and burnt sugar. He took them out of the molds to cool. He would have to make the frosting in a bit soon, but it was best to wait until they had cooled down. Izuku sighed and took out his phone. He would have to leave in about an hour if he was going to make it in time. He left the cupcakes and went to put on his gear. That was a better way of phrasing it, he decided. For years ago, Hisashi looked down at the small child that was his son. He didn't look much like him, which was probably for the best. The only thing he had gotten from Hisashi was the slight lightening from his mother's hair and the curse of his family's quirk. Hisashi crouched down. Izuku, before we left you said you wanted to be a hero, right? He asked the boy softly. The little boy tightened his tiny fists and shook his head, an unhappy expression on his freckled face. It had gotten better in the months since the incident, but his bright smile still hadn't returned, and the unhappy, sad, miserable expression was mostly what Hisashi saw. Hisashi frowned. Why not Zuku? Izuku's eyes filled with tears. I can't be a hero. People won't like being saved by me. Hisashi picked up the small boy and held him against his chest. What do you mean? Izuku sniffled. I have a villain quirk. Hisashi's face softened. No, no, no. Izuku, your quirk is what you make it. If you use it for evil, then yes, you'll have a villain's quirk. But if you use it for good... Izuku looked at him with wide green eyes, hope flashing in and out, there and then gone. His gaze hardened, a too hard expression for an 11-year-old. Izuku shook his head again. This time he wasn't tearful. No, even if I am good, other people will think things of me. It's better to stay quirkless. Hisashi's heart ached. His son had already decided to keep his quirk a secret and, to be honest, Hisashi also thought that would be for the best. He had told Izuku earlier about the dangers of people knowing what his quirk was, but he hadn't anticipated this. If Izuku wanted a quirk, he could just pick one and say that was his quirk. Hell, Hisashi would have even given him his own quirk so that it would have been more believable. But Izuku had flat out refused that. You could always just pick up a minor quirk and call it yours, just to make life easier. You know how it is for quirkless people, Hisashi offered. Izuku shook his head. No, taking other people's quirks is wrong. I don't like my quirk. Hisashi took Izuku's hand, not knowing what to say, and they started walking again. This would at least make Inko worry less about the boy, but it still made Hisashi sad to see his son's dream crushed. It's probably for the best, he kept telling himself. Sometimes Izuku loved his quirk. It just made life so much easier. Yesterday, he had been out grocery shopping when he had seen a guy change the color of his eyes when he was standing in line to pay. Izuku had been intrigued and had taken the quirk from him to test it out himself. The guy hadn't even noticed, which meant changing his eye color was probably just something he did to pass the time. It was kind of ridiculous that he didn't know he was practicing a muscle he didn't have anymore. Because the line was long, he figured that he had time and went to the cosmetics section to get a mirror. He had changed his bright green eyes to black and purple and even blue. He was on his way back to return the quirk when he realized that if he was ever caught in a close-range battle with a pro, then his eyes would be a big giveaway. So he kept the quirk despite his better judgment. It was practical to have, but in hindsight that had been the first civilian he had taken a quirk from, a person who wasn't bothering anybody or stealing. The guilt wasn't that bad because changing your eye color probably wasn't something that was a required skill for any job this guy would be having. But anyways, that quirk was pretty useful right now. He was walking towards the meet-up at a leisurely pace, looking at the buildings on either side of the road as he slowly ate his cupcake. Yes, he was eating a cupcake on the way to his meeting with a new villain group, because who would think a guy eating a cupcake was evil? No, evil things sucked blood and devoured dreams. There was no way someone could see a guy with a vintage anime hoodie that was covering the upper part of his suit thingy, and a bag slung over his shoulder, filled with knives and a mask, eating a cupcake with rainbow sprinkles and think, holy hell, that's a villain. Yeah, no, Izuku wasn't buying that. So anyways, he was getting closer to the meetup place and was now surrounded on both sides by ratty-looking houses. It all looked like it was long overdue for a renovation, and maybe also an exorcist. It was pretty dark already, only the moon and the dim streetlights were lit out here and none of their light reached too far. So when Izuku started using Shadow Storm, it wasn't even noticeable at first. He had practiced with this quirk particularly because it was useful to conceal himself in and for being dramatic too. But the guy he had gotten it from had been right about the nightmares. Izuku hadn't ever had a lot of nightmares, but it seemed like there appeared constantly now. He dreamt of his parents being killed, he dreamt of becoming a SLV to another will, and he dreamt of Kacen bleeding out at Izuku's feet. He had started sleeping less because of them and a bunch of others. He couldn't even comfort himself by finding the people he dreamt of losing. Yes, Kacen had buried him, or at least tried to, but Izuku didn't judge him too much for that. They had known each other for all their lives, and Kacen having a phase in middle school would not stop Izuku caring about him. It wouldn't stop Izuku laughing if he ever saw Kacen being choked by a villain either. They had a weird relationship to say the least. Kacen was all what Izuku had wanted to be before he had gotten his quirk, or more like Kacen's goals. Izuku had wanted to be a hero, he admits it, but it had always seemed more attainable for Kacen, which was fine. Like he had realized many years ago, people weren't created equal. He knew his parents were safe because no one would expect to ever find them there. That bloody cold as mountain in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, nightmares sucked apparently, but he dealt with it, or at least Coffee dealt with it. As the darkness spread wider around him, he almost faded into it. He was just a part of the darkness now, two green eyes the only thing that could be seen. He crouched beside a wall, pulled off his hoodie and stuffed it in his bag after taking out all the knives and slipping them into the hidden holsters in his suit. He put on his mask as the last thing. He hadn't brought his jacket with his because the length of it would show, no matter how big a hoodie he used, and it was too big to fit in the bag. He left the bag on the roof of the house, floating it up there with the weak telekinesis quirk he'd stolen a few nights ago. It reminded him a bit of his mother, so he liked it. He was still getting the hang of it and almost dropped the bag a few times. He went to the door of the supposed meetup place and checked the time. 9:00 p.m. Perfect timing. He pounded on the door, like the polite guest he was, and before the door opened he made one last change. This seemed fitting. He smiled under his mask. Tamura had gotten impatient as they waited for their guest, Kurogiri could tell. He had gotten up from the game he had been playing on the old console Sensei had given him more than 10 minutes ago and had been pacing ever since, scratching his neck while he muttered to himself. Kurogiri just watched as he continued to dry off the glass he had already been doing for 5 minutes now. In the beginning he could have played it off as being thorough, but now it was just ridiculous. He put down the glass and clutched the towel. He glanced at the clock, it was 9 now, the guy Jiren had told them about would be here soon. Who does he even think he is? Tamura continued his low rant. He's just some NPC who thinks he can interfere with my quest. Holy hell, maybe I shouldn't let Sensei give Tamura any more pre-quirk games. Shigaraki Tamura, Kurogiri said, getting the young man's attention. If the rumors are true, then he could be a valuable ally. Tamura went back to scratching at his neck, though more insistently this time. Then someone knocked on the door. Well, knocked would be an understatement. Tamura stopped his scratching to glare at the door. Kurogiri sighed and went to let in their guest. If the rumors were true, then this would be a very interesting person indeed. When he opened the door, it was two blood-red eyes that were staring back at him. Kurogiri would have gasped if he could. Instead he just moved aside to let in the thief, staring dumbly at him. The guy seemed to drag in the shadows with him. Black smoke swirled around his feet and spread out on the floor, but it didn't seem to do any harm. He was wearing simple army-style clothes, cargo pants, a sleeveless black turtleneck, fingerless gloves, and a mask. Not to mention it looked like he was armed to the teeth. The most defining thing about him though was his hair and eyes. He had blue-greenish hair with some white showing in some places and his eyes were red. It was odd how much he looked like Tamura, minus the hands of course. Tamura had placed said hand over his face while Kurogiri was opening the door and were now staring back at the thief. "I take it you're the League?" The newcomer spoke for the first time. Tamura narrowed his eyes at him. "What is it to you?" he asked, drumming his fingers on the bar. "Please don't disintegrate the bar. Please don't disintegrate the bar." Kurogiri repeated again and again in his mind like a prayer. That countertop was straight up gorgeous. It was polished wood and Kurogiri had kept it spotless and stain-free. The thief pet his head to the side. "I heard you're going to attack a hero school. I wanted to know why." He sat down at the bar carelessly. Either he didn't know what Tamura's quirk was or else he knew and didn't care. "I want to kill All Might," Tamura said as if it was obvious. "He sees me off." Kurogiri saw the thief roll his eyes. "I think he sees every villain off. But what is your goal?" Tamura scoffed. "I just want to destroy the things I hate." "Does there need to be a goal? I just want to show the world that their heroes aren't what they cut them out to be. They don't save everyone. Why do people keep thinking that heroes are going to save them?" Tamura scratched at his neck. The thief was actually nodding along to what Tamura had said. "I see." He leaned his elbows on the bar. "I get what you mean. So you want to destabilize the public's faith in heroes?" Tamura actually looked a bit shocked for a second, but then he seemed to shake it off. He nodded. "Yes, precisely." "And you want to do that by killing All Might?" the thief continued. Tamura nodded. The thief hummed, "I don't think that will work." Kurogiri knew Tamura was frowning under the hand. "Why?" he asked, sounding annoyed. Patience had never been Tamura's strong side. All Might is the most loved hero on the planet. If he dies he'll become a martyr. His death will overshadow anything you had wanted to say. "I'm not saying you shouldn't kill him, I'm saying you should wait." "Wait?" Tamura muttered to himself. "Wait and do what?" The thief shrugged. "Find some pro-heroes who shouldn't be heroes. Take Endeavor for example. Whenever he fights there's a bunch of property damage. I'm sure you could dig some dirt up about him." There was a long silence. Tamura seemed to be considering him. He narrowed his eyes. "Who are you even?" he asked the thief. "People call you a vigilante, people call you a villain, but what are you? What are your goals?" The thief looked away from Tamura. "I want to destroy the things I hate too," he said, sounding like he had just realized that himself. Shigaraki didn't know what to think of this particular NPC. His first instinct was to like him, because he agreed with him and even gave Shigaraki advice on his plan. But there was something about him that annoyed Shigaraki. This guy was an unknown player that had all to suddenly entered the game and Sensei had even asked him to keep an eye on the guy. They had all heard the rumors and if they were true then this guy was the one who was rattling the underground. Villain activity had dropped recently because everyone was scared that this guy would come and steal their quirks. It was mostly just small-time villains who believed that though. There was also something uncertain about him. Shigaraki didn't know how to categorize him. Was he a rogue? A villain? A self-proclaimed hero? Shigaraki decided to straight up ask him. "People call you a vigilante, people call you a villain, but what are you? What are your goals?" he said, phrasing it like the guy had earlier. "I want to destroy the things I hate too." Now Shigaraki really looked at him. This guy was no normal NPC, he was something else. Okay, fine, Kurogiri had said that he could be an ally, and this was the first person with questionable morality that had come to see them that Shigaraki actually liked. All the others were bitter and annoying. He reached up, took off the hand stuck to his face and put it on the counter. The guy looked at him and narrowed his eyes suspiciously. "Let's help each other then," Shigaraki said. The guy seemed to think about it, and then he reached his hand up and took off his mask. Izuku had never expected to make nice with the League of FING villains, but Shigaraki, as he introduced himself, seemed like fine enough company. He could admit that he was pretty lonely. He hadn't talked to anybody besides the people he stole quirks from, and that was mostly just insults thrown back and forth. That was fine, he guessed. It wasn't like he would expect them to be cool about him stealing their quirks. He didn't want to steal either of Shigaraki's or Kurogiri's quirks, because first of all, he pretty much had quirks for all types of things now, and second, Shigi ashed almost anything and everything, and that would be bloody inconvenient. He didn't know why that guy didn't wear gloves, but whatever, and Kurogyri was literally covered in his quirk, however that worked. Anyways, after that first meeting, he found himself at the bar a few times more and then it became a regular thing. Apparently Shiggy also liked video games, because when they got talking about things other than their plans for FING over society, they realized that they both used the majority of their spare time gaming. It was fun to have someone to do it with, since he had just been one player NG since he left the mountain. And Shigaraki was actually pretty fun to game with since he got frustrated all the time and hated when he lost. Now he noticed another controller disintegrate in Shigaraki's hands, when Izuku won the game they had been playing again. Shigaraki glared at the floor where the dust that had been the controller was, and then he glared at Izuku. "Why are you so DMN?" "Good," Shigaraki asked him in an annoyed tone. Izuku shrugged. "I spent many months training this, so of course I would be good at it." Okay, I wasn't exactly training to beat a villain in games, but that had been one of the only things to do at the mountain. Shigaraki grunted. "You're lucky I like you, or else you'd be Ash right now." "Sore loser," Izuku mumbled, just loud enough for Shiggy to hear. Shigaraki scowled and wiped his hands on the couch. Izuku clicked his tongue. "You know, some gloves would do you good. I'm sure the local gaming store is running out of stock with how many controllers you ash." "I like ashing things. But yes, it is inconvenient at times," he said, scratching at his neck. He really should stop do that. He already had a lot of scars that seemed like they had come from him doing just that, and the guy was also in desperate need of a chapstick. Izuku shrugged. "Do whatever," he said and stood up. "I gotta be somewhere." He started towards the door, grabbing his thief coat, but then Shigaraki called after him. "Wait." Izuku's hand hesitated on the doorknob. He turned to see Shigaraki looking at him. "The first time you said you came here because of our plans to attack UA, we have altered our plans so that we're going to show that the heroes, in this case All Might, can't save his own students, but do you plan to help?" Izuku looked away from the piercing red eyes that matched his own. He had decided to have red eyes around the villains, since his grandfather apparently had that color eyes, and when he was out as the thief his eyes were black. He only had his own eyes at home. "I'm working on it," Izuku said. "I heard about a guy who can help me with my plans, but I haven't met him yet." Shiggy nodded. "Just be quick about it. They start in school in a few days and we plan to attack after we've gotten a hold of their schedule." He nodded to the villain and then left the bar. He was going to meet Jiren about the guy who could split people into two. If he could get him to copy him, then his plan would work perfectly. Jiren had an office a train ride from here where they were going to meet. He was going to ask about the guy he had been looking for, and hopefully Jiren could help. Izuku sighed and started walking. It would be a long night. Shoyuta sat perched on a rooftop, glaring out at the bright lights of the city. "I have not had enough coffee for this sheet," he grumbled internally. He had been happily living for a while now, not teaching, sleeping a lot, and patrolling. The first day of school was in 2 days and now he had another thing to worry about. All Might, of all people, had approached him about a week ago and told him about a new vigilante. Shoyuta didn't mind the vigilantes that much. They were almost like underground heroes. They just got a bit more attention because what they did was technically illegal. But as long as they saved people, it was the same to Shoyuta. He wouldn't arrest someone for saving an innocent person. But apparently this wasn't the usual kind of vigilante. This one had a quirk that made All Might nervous. All Might, the pillar of society, the symbol of peace. Yeah, hard to imagine. The blonde idiot had asked him to look for the guy and if he could find out who he was. So here I am, 1 a.m. at night, speculating how the thief was able to have an even more fed sleep schedule than Shoyuta himself. It was impressive, really. Shoyuta sighed. He hadn't gotten any sleep for the past several days. He had gotten a couple of hours here and there, but he was still constantly exhausted. He had been looking for this vigilante every night, but it felt like they were running in circles around each other or something. He would hear a commotion and would go check it out, but when he got there it would mostly just be an unconscious villain lying on the street, the shadow of a person disappearing behind a corner. The thief probably knew that they were trying to find him. But Shoyuta would find him and then he would get to the bottom of this. Something was looming in the near future and Shoyuta didn't like it. A dark cloud had been cast over the city. It wasn't because of villain activity, oddly enough. No, villain activity had decreased rapidly in the last couple of days. It was like they were gathering together for something and that something wouldn't be good. That was what worried Shoyuta. That was why he had to find the thief and get that worried look off the face of the man who should be the strongest. He didn't like the guy, but it unnerved him that he was nervous about a vigilante. The thief had only attacked villains so far, but that could always change. So Shoyuta was out here every night, the guy slipping through his fingers every time he got close. Jiren hadn't really thought he would hear from the thief again. He had figured that it was a one-time thing, Jiren introducing him to the League. He had a feeling that both the League and the thief would be mayor players in the future, so he thought it would be beneficial for him if he got on both of their good sides. He had been finding recruits for the League for a while now. He didn't really think that the thief would be a recruit, but they could probably have a mutually beneficial relationship. Jiren hadn't expected for the thief to contact him, but a week or so after the guy had met the League, Jiren got a text. It was from the number the hooded guy had given him. It was simple, just a few words. "We need to meet." Jiren had gotten such a text many times from more obviously aggressive people, but something about the thief was different. He had agreed to the meeting, and had met him in an alley a few hours later. Jiren was nothing if not good at customer service. It had been raining at the time. Jiren had stood under his umbrella, the rain pounding down. The thief had suddenly dropped down right in front of him, startling the hell out of him. He had spoken quietly, but Jiren had heard his silky voice clearly through the rain. The guy stood stupidly still while Jiren was shifting from foot to foot, puffing on his cigarette. "Yes," Jiren answered after the guy had stopped talking, his breath clouded in front of him, because, yes, it was that cold and the thief just had to insist meeting outside in the rain. "I know the guy. Calls himself twice." The thief was silent, so Jiren went on, "I'm guessing that you want to meet him too?" The thief nodded, and Jiren sighed. "You do know that the heroes are on to you, right?" The thief had nodded. That's the whole point of this. Jiren didn't know what he meant, but it wasn't his job to know or understand villains. He just had to help them with various things and then get paid. And that's how he ended up with a fiddling twice who kept contradicting himself. "This is the worst idea ever." "No, it's great. He's probably a great guy. He'll definitely kill me." Jean had his hands on either side of his head clawing at his mask. Believe it or not, he was at his best while wearing the mask. Jiren shook his head slightly. "He won't kill you if he needs you for something, or at least I hope so." Jiren had been thinking that Jean could be a valuable recruit for the League. He sighed internally. "The League this, the League that, is that really all you think about?" Jiren checked his watch. The thief was late. He should have been here 7 minutes ago. And with every minute Jean got more nervous and Jiren more irritated. This guy had no respect for other people's timetables. None at all. Izuku picked the lock to the building Jiren had told him to go to. He wanted to scout the surroundings before he got caught in some annoying situation. Izuku wasn't too worried about the broker double-crossing him since he was connected to the League now. Better safe than sorry though, he thought to himself. The lock clicked when Izuku finally got it open. Picking locks wasn't what he excelled at, but he managed. He opened the door, careful not to make a sound, like he did back when he snuck out of his room at night to get snacks without his mom noticing. The good old days. Izuku shook off the nostalgia and proceeded to enter the warehouse as quietly as possible, which was pretty quiet if he did say so himself. There were a bunch of stocked crates all around and he could see the office from where he was, but the people in it probably couldn't see him. He crept closer, keeping to the shadows. The outfit he was wearing was also pretty dark, so he blended in well. As he approached, he saw through the windows of the office that there were only 2 people inside, Jiren and who he assumed to be this twice guy. The warehouse was otherwise empty. He made sure to check. Apparently the eye-changing quirk also meant that he could also see infrared light, which was kinda weird but really helpful. He had just been practicing the quirk, and then suddenly he was looking at a red and yellow person. He had also been able to see his neighbors next door when he looked around. Now Izuku sighed and began approaching the office. It was really late and he had taken down a few villains on the way here. Not anyone with useful quirks, so he didn't really know why he had bothered. When he opened the door, Jiren's eyes were already trained on him, but the other guy turned around with a gasp, looking like he both wanted to run away and run at him. "Is this him?" Izuku asked Jiren, who nodded. Izuku turned to twice with a smile the man couldn't see. Nice to meet you, Jean Babaigawara. I need your help with something. A few nights later, Shoyuta finally met the thief. He had been running around all night, stopping robberies and such, when he had come across a dark alley where a man was fighting a group of 3. Shoyuta was about to go help him when the fight made him hesitate. The guy wasn't on the defensive, it was him who was attacking the group. Smoke was twirling around them as they all moved around in the fight. Shoyuta looked on and realized who exactly this was. After knocking down the last person, the thief wiped his hands on the front of his jacket. He was wearing dark gloves that he tugged off and tucked into a pocket. He hadn't seen Shoyuta yet, and he wasn't about to make himself known to the thief. He watched as the guy crouched down next to one of the guys he had been fighting. He touched the tips of his fingers to the guy's chest, and a small but bright light spread through his fingers up his hand and arm like veins. Shoyuta took a step back, so he really did take something. Just like All Might had said. Shoyuta activated his quirk, just in case. The thief tensed and looked straight at Shoyuta. He couldn't see anything other than the thief's dark eyes and some hair peeking out from the hood of the coat. "What a pain," the thief said. "Thought I had done a pretty good job of avoiding you." The thief's voice was a bit low and smooth, but most of all, threatening. A voice that wasn't to be taken lightly. Shoyuta frowned. "You knew I was trying to find you?" The thief shrugged. "It's pretty effing obvious, not gonna lie. You haven't exactly been subtle." He narrowed his eyes at Shoyuta. "But now that you've found me, what do you want?" Shoyuta had to remind himself that he was a competent hero and this was just a vigilante. A rogue one at that, but he was still just a vigilante. Shoyuta glared at him and readied his capture weapon. "I want to take you in," and then his capture weapon latched out and wrapped around the space where the thief had been standing. Shoyuta aimed at where the thief had moved to. The thief evaded easily, seemingly effortlessly. "You know, that just won't do," the thief said, having not even broken a sweat during the previous fight and the current one. Shoyuta gritted his teeth. "I don't care if you're a vigilante or a villain who just conveniently doesn't like other villains. You're coming with me." The thief laughed. "Coming with you? You'll have to try harder then." And that's what Shoyuta did, and it seemed like the thief became more serious too, which was a bit satisfying. Shoyuta kept his quirk on, but the teach thief apparently didn't need a quirk or weapons to fight on equal grounds with a hero. Shoyuta was fighting with his usual fighting style, but the thief seemed to know his every move and countered easily, while raining down blows on Shuta's arms, and he also got in a few hits to Shuta's head which disoriented him a bit. The thief, however, did not relent or let him recover. Then Shoyuta, by some miracle, got his scarf wrapped around the thief's arm and was about to take him down, but the thief just pulled out a knife from nowhere and slashed it into pieces. He then grabbed the scarf and pulled Shoyuta in close to knee him in the stomach. Shoyuta grunted. That was one of his moves. Had the thief figured him out so easily that he could use Shuta's own weapon against him? The thief then threw him to the ground and planted his boot on Shuta's chest. Just about everything ached by now. The thief was precise and unwavering in his attacks, and Shoyuta could feel the warm feeling of blood along his hairline. "I gotta say," the thief started, "you might be one of my favorite heroes." "I'm flattered," Shoyuta gritted out. As he tried to move, roll, or something, just get up and then he would figure out the rest. But as it seemed, the thief was strong as well and pinned him down while pressing down on his ribcage. The thief chuckled, "You should be," and then everything went dark. About a week before, somewhere in Yuzudafu. "When is dinner ready?" he yelled as he washed his hair, the residue from the green dye going down the drain. His hair had become whiter and whiter recently, so he had decided that if he was going to make this work, he would have to look the part. Back to green it was. It had been that color when he was small, but after his quirk had manifested it, had just become more and more pale. It had been turquoise for a while, but that was mostly gone by now. "Are you talking about the pizza?" came the reply a few seconds later. Izuku sighed. "Yes. The freaking store-bought frozen pizza I told you to heat up." He heard some shuffling from the kitchen and then the sound of the oven opening and closing. He rolled his eyes. "I guess my clone is also a chronic procrastinator. Tough luck really." Izuku grabbed a towel from behind him and started drying his hair. Annoyingly enough, the towel also turned green because of the dye. What a mess. He didn't bother drying his hair all the way and left it as it was. dripping only a little now. When he walked back into the living room he saw himself, or the clone of himself, lying half down on the sofa, playing a game that sounded suspiciously like Pac-Man on his phone. Izuku glared at him when he registered the burnt smell of pizza gone wrong. For F's sake, I know I'm not the best at cooking, but this is ridiculous. Other Izuku snorted from the sofa, but then groaned, it can't be completely ruined, it's only been in for like a minute. He jumped up from the sofa and followed Izuku into the kitchen. They both hesitated when they saw the microwave. It's, other Izuku began. Smoking, Izuku concluded and rubbed at his eyes. Instant noodles? Other Izuku asked. Izuku sighed internally and resigned himself to never eating anything but the floury paste and boiled water with spice mix in. The world just seemed to be against him at the moment, and he knew he was being dramatic, but he really didn't care and he really did want to sleep. His stomach grumbled after food as they stared at their ruined pizza. How the F? Did you even ruin a pizza in less than a minute? That was just unbelievably unlucky. Instant noodles, he agreed. The police department had set up a vigilante watch that officially consisted of 2 people, Tsukachi and Sansa Tamakawa, but All Might, Eraserhead and Sir Night Eye were also involved. They had monitored all known vigilantes. A few more had actually popped up recently, but their focus was the thief. It was 6 in the morning, but Tsukachi had gotten a call from All Might who said Aizawa had run into the thief and was injured. He met All Might in the hallway outside of Aizawa's hospital room. He wasn't in his muscle form and was pacing while looking nervously at the door. Any news? Tsukachi asked as he approached. Yagi almost looked relieved to see him. He just woke up and the nurses are doing a check. It isn't that bad. He has a concussion, a broken rib and some bruises. Tsukachi nodded. Did he get a glimpse of the thief's face or just anything? Yagi looked back at the door. I haven't talked to him yet, but the guy who brought him in is over there. He pointed to a tall guy with broccoli green hair who was talking to a nurse. His brows were furrowed and he looked troubled and concerned. Tsukachi nodded to Yagi and went over to the guy. Hello, he said, interrupting the conversation him and the nurse were having. The guy's eyes widened when he saw him and he took a small step back. Hi. I heard you were the one to bring in Eraserhead. Could you tell me where you found him and what you were doing there? The guy gulped. I found him in an alley close to X Station. He was unconscious and was showing clear signs of fighting and then he then smiled a bit awkwardly while rubbing the back of his neck. I realized it was Eraserhead. I'm a bit of a F fan of his, and took him to the hospital. Tsukachi nodded. And why were you there at close to 5 in the morning? He hesitated and dropped his hand. I'm a, vigilante? Daylight vigilante to be exact, and I was just on my way out. Oh, wait, now that he thought about it, this guy looked exactly like one of the new vigilantes out. He usually left villains cuffed with zip ties but mostly unharmed. The media had picked up on him pretty quickly but hadn't picked a name for him yet. Tsukachi did a double take. You just admitted to a police officer that you're a vigilante? The guy smiled like he was making a joke. Yes, but you can't arrest me. Tsukachi gave his a deadpan stare. And why can't I arrest you? He had only realized now that the guy wasn't that old. He was relatively tall, but he wasn't completely grown yet. Tsukachi would guess that he was 18, maybe 17. Well, the guy grinned. I'm not a valid vigilante because I don't have a quirk. Tsukachi registered that what he said was true, before he realized exactly what he had said. You're what? Shoyuta could hear boots pounding against the ground. He didn't register it or think much of it. He was floating in the place between unconsciousness and consciousness. He could hear a voice but not what it said. He tried to open his eyes but everything was blurry. He could see some colors in the darkness. A silhouette? Was that a person? He tried blinking to clear his mind, but it felt like he was moving in slow motion. He couldn't stop his eyes from falling closed again and drifting off. When Shoyuta woke up, his head was pounding. He groaned, brightness from above hurting his eyes. Shut off the rotting lights, he half yelled. He heard what he assumed to be a nurse making a startled sound, since a patient suddenly started yelling out of nowhere and rushed to turn off the lights. When the lights were off, he tried opening his eyes. The nurse was standing by the side of his bed, looking partly concerned and annoyed. People probably yell at her a lot, he thought. Oh well, she could get in line. He didn't need to ask about what had happened. He already knew. The pain in his head and side had told him pretty much of his state. The thief had gotten the better of him. Shoyuta scowled and plopped back down on the bed. The only upside to this was that he could probably skip work for a day or two, which he intended to sleep through. Over the years he had become accustomed to sleeping in crowded and noisy places. He had once taken out his sleeping bag at the hero ranking ceremony and had heard for it ever since. So Shoyuta easily dozed as the nurses moved around him with their charts. He had tried this many times, so he knew he didn't need to be conscious for this part. Some 30 minutes later a few people walked into his room. He didn't want to talk to them, so he just pretended to be asleep. The people came to a stop a few feet from his bed and Shoyuta could almost hear the awkwardness from how they were shuffling their feet and clearing their throats. Didn't they say he was awake? He heard the distinct voice of Skinny All Might say. Shoyuta heard the other one sigh. Yes, they did, and if he's not awake we'll probably have to use this tall glass of cold water to rouse him. Shoyuta opened his eyes a little and glared at Tsukachi, who just smiled like he hadn't just threatened a pro-hero. He offered the glass to Shoyuta, which he took, as he realized just how dry his throat was. You won't even leave me alone when I'm injured? He asked irritably. Tsukachi shook his head. We need to know if you learned something from your fight with the thief. Shoyuta snorted. I learned that he's demon tough and very skilled. He then took a big gulp of the water. You didn't see his face? Any features? Something that could help identifying him. Tsukachi pressed further. Shoyuta gave him a deadpan stare. He wears a mask, but I can say his eyes are dark, blue, green, brown, whatever, they just look dark. And, Shoyuta hesitated as he thought back. I think his hair was blonde, white maybe? It just looked pale, but that doesn't really help either. Anyways, what I can say is that the next time we confront him we need to be a bit more than just one since he can obviously dash. He gestured at the bandages he was covered in. Handle that. All Might looked unnerved, which annoyed Shoyuta. He was the bloody number one. Just because this guy had gotten the better of Shoyuta didn't mean he could take down the symbol of peace. Hopefully. Shuta's scowl deepened. Stop looking so dim and defeated, he isn't invincible. The others didn't say anything to that, so Shoyuta just sighed and let it pass. How did I even get here? He asked the two. Tsukachi's brows furrowed. A vigilante brought you in dash. Shudo sat up a bit straighter. And no, it wasn't the thief. He has already proven himself to be quite smart. It was one of the new vigilantes, the one with the green hair who fights with a bow's staff. Shoyuta racked his brain for the guy's face. He could remember that he had heard of him but not much more. Did you arrest him then? That is your job after all. Shoyuta rolled his eyes. This vigilante was actually one of the good ones. He didn't use excessive force or anything, just took down villains quickly and with as little violence as possible. Tsukachi shook his head. Kind of hard to arrest a quirkless guy when the law literally says that a vigilante is someone who uses his quirk illegally to fight villains. Oh well, if it works it works. Where is he now? He asked. Yagi shook his head. He just left, said something about villains rising with the sun. 2 days later, in the underbelly of the city, Izuku kicked open the door to Jiren's warehouse when he finally made it to the rotting place. It was to Diamond early in the morning to be alive, which was bloody irritating. Why the hell did school also take place from 8 a.m. in the bloody morning? Almost all the people who were gathered inside turned to look as he stepped through the door, yawning. He could see Shigaraki and Kurojiri standing in the office and trudged over, the villains giving him a wide berth. They probably all knew who he was by now. He had built himself quite the reputation which was simultaneously annoying and convenient. He glared at a few people who dared to stand too close with his blood-red eyes. It was fun seeing them regret their life choices. He was wearing his usual long coat, knives strapped everywhere he could. He had dropped the guns since he didn't really need them that much, and it was more fun to use a knife anyways. He didn't need the grappling hook since he had snatched a levitating quirk some time ago. He finally made it to the office and threw open the door. Yes, he had walked several miles to get here, but a stretch where you were surrounded on every side by lowlives were much more unnerving than just being some tired-looking teenager walking around on the street. Shigaraki, Kurojiri and Jiren turned to him, Shigaraki with a raised brow and Jiren with his usual smirk and cigarette. Are we gonna do this or what? Izuku asked chapter text. As the villains prepared to attack, the other Izuku was sitting on a random roof with his legs dangling off the edge. His plan was to stay as far away from UA as possible and take down some villains. He had made this second persona so that he wouldn't be suspected of being the thief, and thanks to Jin he could be both at the same time. He hadn't taken Jin's quirk because of his decision to stay far away from quirks that were harmful to the user, and he really didn't want to end up with a split personality. He had made that decision after taking, or rather buying, that shadow quirk. It was useful, yes, but he wasn't the biggest fan of seeing people he cared about die in his dreams. But he still had to live with himself, like literally, and the other Izuku was just as sassy and annoying as himself, which made the argument about who was doing the dishes that much more drawn out. And his bloody clone had even left him to take Eraserhead to the hospital after roughing him up. What the f? Did he look like an errand boy? He should clean up his own mess. Wait, they were both Izuku, so technically he did. Izuku sighed, shaking his head, thinking about this was just confusing him. He stood up and pocketed his bow staff. It wasn't really his weapon of choice, but at least he didn't seem too threatening with it. It was also the type of staff that could retract in on itself, so it was easy to have a few on him, in case he lost any of them during a fight. The sun was rising steadily as he jumped from roof to roof on his pursuit of crime. You should look in the mirror, the annoying voice that belonged to himself said. Izuku laughed breathlessly. It wasn't like he was against the heroes. He just had things to do, and if some heroes or laws stood in the way, then that was that. In the end, what he did would be for their gain. A world without All for One, didn't that sound nice? All Might would probably agree with me, he mused. Yeah, the idiot would probably be glad that it wasn't his problem anymore. Izuku changed direction as he heard a startled scream a couple of streets over. He pulled out a bow staff and extended it as he hit ground. Someone gasped to his right, he flashed them a smile, and then he charged. The villains didn't see him coming and one went down like a rock. It was a well-practiced move that Hisahi had knocked into him, literally. Delivered into unconsciousness with the smallest amount of damage, the victim didn't even feel it. It was the most useful thing his father had taught him, and he used it several times every day now that he was being a good little law-abiding vigilante. Izuku swiped the feet of the other one and the guy tripped. You know, it's pretty rude to rob someone this close to dawn. The guy glared at him. He had spiky black hair and orangish eyes. Would it be better if we did it at night, you a-hole? Izuku frowned. You really are rude. The guy suddenly grabbed Izuku's ankle and then he electrocuted him. Izuku dropped like a sack of potatoes and spasmed on the ground until the guy let go of him. The grade a-hole stood up and went to help his partner in crime. Izuku groaned. Oh, you really Essie, he said breathlessly. It hurt like, everywhere. He could still feel it, but he got up and while the guy was preoccupied with his partner, Izuku tackled him. He sighed. It was kind of annoying that even if he did find a nice quirk, he couldn't snatch it since that would ruin the whole point of walking around as a smiling, optimistic idiot. He was just about to zip-tie their hands and leave them for the pros when he felt something wrap around his chest. He got a weird sort of déjà vu before he heard a gruff voice say, "You're coming with me," and was just about to turn around and cut the bloody bonds of him, but then he did turn around. And he saw who it was. Shoyuda had been on his way to work when he had noticed the commotion. The problem children had to go rescue training today, so they were taking a bus to the USJ. He had planned to be there at least 5 minutes before class, but when he spotted the new vigilante taking down 2 villains who were carrying some bags of what Shoyuda assumed was money. This was the guy the detective had said had brought him to the hospital. He matched the picture in his file perfectly. Lean but with obvious muscle, green hair the same color as broccoli, just more vibrant. He wore a pair of dark green cargo pants with big pockets, a matching turtleneck with no sleeves and a white bumper jacket over it. He had on some white gloves and a pair of red high tops. He took the villains down easily, but then he went down as well and Shoyuda saw the villain who was still conscious run over to his partner. He must have hit the vigilante with his quirk. But the vigilante quickly recovered and tackled the villain to the ground again. Shoyuda didn't wait, he lashed out with his capture weapon and caught the vigilante. "You're coming with me," Shoyuda said. The guy who only looked to be a teenager tensed, but then he looked behind him and saw Shoyuda. His eyes widened and he dropped the hand he had raised to fight or whatever ill-advised thing he had intended. Shoyuta was definitely late now. The teacher was late. Katsuki wore a permanent scowl as the substitute teacher led them to the bus. He had told them to change into their costumes and had said the teacher would be with them as soon as possible. Katsuki had scoffed at that. Wasn't this supposed to be the top school in the country? The world? That was why Katsuki was there anyways. But all that talk about being committed to being heroes and training seemed a bit hypocritical, if the guy himself couldn't bother to make it on time. Now they were waiting at the school's parking lot. The other extras were talking amongst themselves. They had tried talking to Katsuki but he had just glared at them until they went away. He wasn't here for friends, he had never needed friends. He used to have some extras following him around but they didn't really know him. The only person who had truly been his friend was off who knows where. Katsuki had thought he would run into him around the time school started when the loser was on his way to the loser school he had gotten into, but no. It annoyed Katsuki beyond measure. Did Deku really think he could just disappear? The next time Katsuki saw him he would blow up the DMN nerd. The substitute teacher was stuttering as some of the extras interrogated him about their teacher and the trip in general. Katsuki rolled his eyes. "Look, you even let the villains get away," a voice protested from around a corner. The voice was oddly familiar but Katsuki couldn't place it. He recognized the tired voice of their homeroom teacher answer curtly. "I'm really not supposed to be here," the other voice protested again. "Seriously, this is a bad idea." The class turned to look as their teacher appeared after turning a corner. With him was a person with something that looked like a hero suit but more casual. He had green hair and freckles and Katsuki froze. "Deku!" He almost hadn't recognized the nerd. He had grown taller in the time they hadn't seen each other and he no longer looked like the wind would knock him down. It looked like Katsuki was still taller but the nerd had really changed a lot. Hearing his name, Deku turned his head and beamed when he saw Katsuki. "Kacen!" And then he was being assaulted by the nerd. Katsuki shoved him off. "What the hell are you doing here?" he yelled at the nerd. Deku smiled and rubbed the back of his neck. "Long story." "Kacen," some of the extras mumbled and Katsuki turned to glare at them. "Bakugo, do you know this kid?" his teacher asked, sounding tired. Katsuki scoffed. "We went to school together." He was just gonna leave it at that but the Deku added, "And we were best friends." "Bakugo has friends?" Dunce's face said incredulously. "He's not my friend." Deku pouted. "You're hurting my feelings, Kacen." He put a hand over his heart. "We've known each other since we were kids." Katsuki bristled. "Shut up, Deku." He turned to his teacher. "Sensei, what is he doing here?" Aizawa sighed. "I'm bringing him in for questioning but because I have to teach this class he's coming along." "Huh." The teacher nodded. "So you don't know your best friend is a vigilante then?" Katsuki was about to explode when he registered what Aizawa had said. He turned to Deku. "You're a vigilante?" Izuku cringed at the sheer volume of Kacen's voice. The constant headache of being in the blonde's presence was something he hadn't missed. Besides how impractical it was for him to be here, he couldn't afford making Eraserhead suspicious, and maybe he could make the heroes trust him if he fought against some of the villains. He wasn't going to interfere with Shigi's plan. He couldn't actually, not without blowing his cover. The only thing he had to do was act like he didn't have a quirk and just fight with his fists. That seemed easy enough. Before he could answer Kacen's question with a deadpan "yes," Eraserhead interrupted. "Enough, get on the bus, we're late." Izuku was honestly surprised that he hadn't been blown up yet. Some guy with blue hair and glasses chopped through the air with his arms and tried to get everyone on the bus. Izuku frowned. This guy was too much of a try-hard for his taste but he got the noisy class on the bus. Izuku tried staying behind but he just got pushed onto the bus by the pro and ended up sitting at the end of one of the two rows that faced each other in the first half of the bus. Kacen was sitting in the other end, which was fortunate since he didn't want to be within touching distance of Kacen while he looked like that. The raven-haired girl next to him was a bloody miracle for looking like he didn't even bother her. Izuku liked her, he decided. She also seemed to have a sound or music-related quirk since she used her ears as earphones. That was actually pretty cool. There was a lot of different quirks in this class, it seemed. Next to him sat a green-haired girl with some type of frog mutation and next to her a guy with bright red hair. Are you really a vigilante, Deku? A girl with brown hair in a pink and black suit asked him. He shrugged. That depends on how you look at it, I guess. Oh, and my name isn't Deku. The girl looked puzzled. But that's what Bakugo called you? Izuku smiled. Yeah, well, Kacen loves nicknaming people. My name's Izuku, but you can call me Deku if you'd like. I think it's funny. The girl nodded. Why aren't you trying to be a hero, though? The guy with red hair asked. If you went to school with Bakugo, then you should be our age, but I didn't see you at the exam. He could see Kacen roll his eyes at them. Izuku shrugged again. I can't be a hero, he said simply. Why, Deku-chan? The green-haired girl asked him. Kacen spared him the trouble of answering himself. Because he's quirkless, you idiots, he said. They all turned to look at him and he shrugged. It looked like half of this conversation was just him shrugging. It is what it is. Then the guy with yellow hair and a lightning theme to his costume cleared his throat. How do you fight villains without a quirk? Izuku grinned sharply. I don't need a quirk. I bet I could take down any of you without even using my staff. It was a provocative statement and he knew he would get at least one challenger. They all seemed to take him in again, to truly size up if they would be able to take him on, even with the help of a quirk. Izuku knew he had packed on some muscle and he could be an intimidating figure, judging on the villains he had faced in the past. The guy with the red hair grinned, like he'd love to try. A few others also seemed up to the challenge. The guy with the half-red and half-white colored hair, that Izuku had assumed to be a child of endeavors, was still sleeping in the back. Kacen, on the other hand, simply sprang to his feet. Do you want to fight, Deku? Izuku smirked. I'd love to fight you, Kacen. The blonde looked just about to pounce, even though they were still in a bus, but then his kidnapper announced loudly, We're here, stop messing around. He then glared at Izuku, who smiled his sweetest smile. They all got off the bus, with Izuku having half a mind to just make a run for it. He knew what would happen when they went inside, and he hadn't had breakfast yet. And he would probably also be attending this questioning Eraser had mentioned earlier. Fan-if-ing-tastic. He groaned internally but trudged along, joining the crowd of students who were starstruck by the presence of 13. Izuku had made it his business to know each and every active hero in the area so that he knew how to fight them best, and he seriously hadn't figured out a strategy for 13 yet. But that was just because you didn't need one. A pro tip would just be to avoid being SCKD into their finger. That was a good start at least. If he had had his guns, he would shoot them. If they figured out he was the thief, it wasn't likely, but still, then he would probably have to fight them all, which would SCK. The whole reason he was here was to not get the pros on his back. Oh, I love 13, the girl in pink and black exclaimed. Almost all the bloody students were saying something like that in odd voices, with the exception of Kacen, who was still sending glares at Izuku, and half-white half-red guy who just looked tired, and the purple-haired guy who looked even more tired. Izuku had to cough into his sleeve to hide his laughter. Hero students were the best. Their blind adoration of someone who was a bloody pro was hilarious. DMN, he had tried not to get political, but seriously, the hero system was effed up. He had nothing against the people, it was just the system in general. He sobered a bit when he thought of Shigaraki and the plan for the USJ. They were on their way in now, after they had all shouted, very loudly, how much they were looking forward to work with 13. Yeah, we get it. When they had made it inside, 13 presented the different disaster zones. Unforeseen simulation joint, huh? So that was what the USJ stood for? Izuku had thought it would be something like useless sheet joint or something the like, but the other thing worked too. His kidnapper walked over to the hero with his hands in his pockets. 13, where is All Might? He was supposed to meet us here. Yeah, about that. His worse half had set up a bunch of obstacles for the number one so that he would use most of the time he had fighting petty crime. 13 said something that they couldn't hear, holding up a few fingers. Izuku guessed that they were telling Eraser of All Might's delay. He nodded, looking even more tired, and stepped to the side. 13 spread their arms. Let's see, before we begin, let me say one thing, or two, or three. Can they decide? Or 4, 5, 6, 7. Guess not. They then held up a hand. Everyone, I'm sure you are aware of my quirk, black hole. I can SCK up anything and turn it to dust. Yeah, that's what you just did with my will to live. Izuku tuned the next part out. What was it with heroes and explaining their quirks in a lot of unnecessary details? When he had met Shigaraki for the first time, the guy had literally said, "I disintegrate sheet." Like, what is up with all this? Quirks are dangerous, they can kill, blah blah blah. Sheet. After a sheet ton of time, they were finally done with the stupid speech. That is all. Thank you for listening. I didn't. Then class all began clapping, which Eraser had interrupted. All right then, first dash. Then the lights went out, and one of Kurogiri's warp gates opened up in front of the fountain. Shigaraki went through as the first, covered in more of his hands. He had really dressed up for this, huh? Then came the other Izuku, followed by a lot of villains. Izuku saw himself spot himself and waved discreetly. The other Izuku face-palmed and then shook his head. 13. Protect the students. Eraser said. Ouch, I feel excluded. Is this like the entrance exam where the lessons already started? The guy with spiky red hair asked. Eraser pulled on his goggles. Don't move. Those are villains. All the hero students tensed up, looking scared as hell. What villains? The redhead said incredulously. No way, there's no way they could get into a hero school. Well, obviously they did. Teacher, what about the trespasser sensors? The girl with the ponytail said. We have them, of course, but did they only appear here or around the whole school? This was the first time half white half red spoke up. Either way, if the sensors are not responding, that means they have someone with a quirk that can do that. These guys could only think inside the box. It had to be a quirk. Of course it was a quirk. No, it couldn't at all be because Izuku had great hacking skills. But still, this guy was observant. An isolated area separated from the main campus during a time when a class is supposed to be here. They might be fools, but they're not dumb. Thanks. The surprise attack was carefully planned. You think? I spent so much time planning with Shiggy, I swear. With some sort of goal in mind. That's usually what people have when they do something, like I bought flour the other day with the goal of baking brownies. 13. Start the evacuation, Eraser said. Try calling the school. It won't work, Izuku mused in his mind. These villains even had something to counteract the sensors. It's possible someone with radio wave-type powers is interfering. Good guess, but no. Kaminari, you try contacting the school with your quirk too, he said to Sparky Boy. You can't fight the villains alone, Sensei, Kacen said, stepping forward. Eraser glared at him. You stay put, he nodded to 13, and I'm a hero. Fighting villains is what I do. Oh right, I'm supposed to be a vigilante, I fight villains too. Guess I'll get to fight some villains today after all, Izuku said as he stretched, receiving a lot of incredulous looks from the hero students. He saluted Eraserhead and took off towards the villains. See you down there, Eraser, he yelled over his shoulder. As long as he only fought minor recruits, it should be okay. He just needed to look like an ally for the heroes and not blow his own cover, and if the other Izuku got unmasked, then everything would go to shit. Katsuki watched with gritted teeth as the idiot launched himself at the villains, Aizawa-sensei on his heels. He wanted to join them, he wanted to fight. How did Deku think he could go up against that many? Even with the help of a pro, they would be at a disadvantage. The Katsuki saw him fight and understood. This wasn't the Deku from over 10 months ago, this was someone highly trained. He moved through the air like an acrobat. The villains he came into contact with went down. Sensei was right beside him, erasing quirks and using his capture weapon to immobilize them. Deku was taking down villains just as fast as a pro, if not faster. What the F dash? He mumbled to himself. What had happened to the Deku he had known, and who was this? Katsuki narrowed his eyes at the fight. Sensei had said to evacuate, but Katsuki could definitely help. Should he listen and get to safety or go down there and cover the idiot's back? His fingers tingled with the impulse to blow something up. Hurry up and take shelter, came the voice of their class representative. Katsuki glared at him. Shut up, Four Eyes. He then went after his class in 13. With each step he wanted to go back. Deku is quirkless. You can do more than him. Go help for F's sake, you usul. Then another one of those black portals opened up right in front of them. I won't let you, it said. Nice to meet you, we are the League of Villains. What a stupid but name for a group of stupid but people. It may be presumptuous of us, but we have invited ourselves into the home of the heroes, UA High School, in order to bring about the downfall of All Might's legacy. Well now, what was this Misty extra saying? All Might's legacy? Yeah, that is pretty presumptuous of you, B.S.D. Katsuki clenched his fists. The warp guy seemed to spread his arms. Whatever, Katsuki heard enough. He nudged Shitty Hair and charged at the villain, leveling a big explosion right in the Misty fucker's face with Shitty Hair right by his side. He grinned as the smoke cleared. Take that, you be. Beside him, Shitty Hair said exactly what he was thinking. Did you consider that you'd get beaten by us before you did it? Oh dear, that's dangerous, came the villain's voice. That's right, even if you are students, you are excellent golden eggs. Did he just call us eggs? The hell dash? No. Katsuki looked back at 13 who had opened up access to one of their fingers. Move away, you two. But they didn't get to move or do anything before they were all encased in darkness. Next thing he knew, he was in a ratty-looking room in what he assumed to be the collapse zone. Shitty Hair was there and a bunch of villains had them surrounded. Katsuki grinned, too bad for them. Ida had gotten Ochako, Ashido, Siro, Sato and Shoji out of the dark dome the villain had encased their classmates in quickly. Now they stood as the only ones left, looking down at the chaos that the USJ had become. The warp gate villain still separated them from the exit. 13 stood the closest to him, protecting the students. Class rep. Ida straightened. I entrust this duty to you. Run to the school and tell them about what is happening here. The alarms are not sounding and our phones don't have signal. The alarm system is based on infrared rays. Even though Eraserhead is erasing people's quirks left and right, they are still not working, which means they must have someone with an interference quirk who hid right when they arrived. It would be faster for you to run than for us to find that person. Ochako nodded to what they were saying. It made perfect sense. Ida was the fastest of them here, and if he went they could probably get some backup soon. But it would be a disgrace as class rep to leave everyone behind dash. Go, emergency exit. Sato said, going into a battle stance. If you can get outside, there are alarms. That's why these guys are only doing this inside, right? C walked up beside him. As long as you go outside they won't follow you. Blow away this fog with your legs. Use your quirk in order to save others. Ochako smiled encouraging at Ida. I can totally support you like I did in the cafeteria. She shook her head, determined. I will. Please, class rep. Ida nodded to himself. He seemed to have decided as well. Even if you have no other choice, are there really idiots who talk about their plans in front of the enemy? The purple-black mist guy bellowed. Ochako cringed. Yeah, that was perhaps not the smartest. 13 raised their hand. We did it because it didn't matter if we're found out. They then shouted the name of their move, Black Hole, and proceeded to SCK up the purple mist. Ida ran at the door, but another purple gate popped up right in front of him that he didn't have time to evade. But then Shoji grabbed the warp gate to clear the way. Ida ran faster and disappeared through a Ida-shaped hole in the door. The villain then disappeared and reappeared down by the waterfall where he had originally appeared. Ashido leaned in to whisper something to Ochako with a sly smile. This is probably a bad time, but I have to vent and Hagakure isn't here, so can we just talk about how hot that Deku guy is? Ochako turned positively red at that. She had noticed, of course. She would have been blind not to. Deku was pretty cool. He was their age but just seemed much more, not mature but like he was already out there fighting crime. And by the looks of it he was also pretty good at it. He moved really fast down where him and Aizawa-sensei were fighting. And just the fact that he could hold his own while being quirkless was really impressive. He was probably more skilled than most pros were. Denki was running from this super tall and buff guy who was trying to kill him. The guy swung his fist at him but Denki dodged it. Scary. Seriously, did you see that just now? I saw the river Styx, seriously. What the heck is up with these guys? What's going on? He knew he was rambling, but could you blame him? They were surrounded by a bunch of freaky-looking people who were most definitely trying to kill them. Worry about that later, Jur said. Clutching the sword Momo had made her tightly. Right now we need to figure out how we'll get away from all these people. Denki made a quick scan of the crowd. There was a guy with a chicken head, a blue guy with 4 arms, a lady with a scythe and another chicken guy. They were dead meat. Then give me a weapon too, he said, knowing he sounded more than a little panicked. Gyre was also taking in their opponents, a crease showing between her eyebrows. You're the electric guy, aren't you? Hurry up and take care of them. Denki clenched his teeth. She had literally been there during combat training. You saw during the combat training, didn't you? We were paired up. I can only cover myself with electricity. He held up a hand and made some electricity crackle in his palm. I can discharge electricity, but it's not like I can control it. I'll hit you too. The withering look that Gyre sent him then made him a bit defensive. It's like, he's same as Todoroki. Even if we wanted to call for help, there's interference jamming the signal. He tapped his earpiece. Listen, you two. Right now you can't count on me. It hurt to say it, but it was the bitter truth. I'm counting on you. Gyre glared at him. You're the guy, aren't you? Stop whining. He was about to protest that he was not in fact whining and merely stating a fact when the big butt helmet guy tried hitting him again. He dodged and took a few quick steps back. Then I'll use you as a human stun gun, he heard Gyre yell behind him right before she kicked him straight into the villain. Denki looked up. Oh, it's actually working. The guy had electricity running through him which made him unable to fight at the same time. Denki smiled. I'm strong, he gave them a thumbs up. You two can count on me. Gyre looked at him like he was the dumbest thing to ever walk the earth. You're too happy-go-lucky. Denki didn't take it personally. Then Gyre dodged a villain and used her speakers to blast him off. The guy incidentally punched Denki right in the face and got electrocuted too. Mom caught a villain with a net that also touched the now many people who were being affected by Denki's quirk. Both of you should take this more seriously, she yelled. Sorry, Gyre said. I thought it was a good idea at the time. She used the speakers to momentarily incapacitate the villains near her. Kaminari, you should have requested something to help you aim in your costume order. I hadn't thought about that, he grumbled to himself. A villain jumped out from the cliff above her, a small axe in each hand. Denki yelled for her to look out, but before the villain touched the ground, something really fast and green collided with him. They both crashed to the ground and one of them grunted. Sheet. The other guy, Bakugo's vigilante friend, stood up, brushing dust off his shirt. He looked back at Denki and the other two and smiled. Hey there. Then a giant white sheet burst from Yaoyorozu's back and landed over her and Gyre. She lifted up the sheet so that they could see her face. It's an insulation sheet 100 millimeters thick, Kaminari. Oh sweet, the vigilante said. Take it away, Electro Dude, and then he jumped underneath the sheet. Denki grinned. In that case, I can be really strong. He set his power off with like a crazy charge and then he fried the villains and himself. Izuku had been going around through some of the zones, helping out a few students here and there, but he didn't think he could prolong this anymore. All the students seemed to be managing now and he needed to follow the plan that he had come up with in about the time it took him to get down to the villains. As soon as the screaming stopped, he lifted up the sheet and peeked out. I think it's safe now. He looked back at the two girls and whipped his head back around when he realized that one of their suits had broken. He took off his jacket and held it out behind his back. It's okay, the girl with the ponytail said. I can just make a new one. Oh right, the creator quirk. That was actually pretty cool. All right then, he said, a bit awkwardly and stepped out from under the sheet. He looked over at the blonde-haired guy who seemed to have lost more than one brain cell. Izuku frowned. Could this guy really only use all his strength if he turned into a complete moron after? That's bloody inconvenient. He then looked over to the main square where Eraser was taking on way too many villains, but he was actually handling it. Every villain he set his red eyes on got taken down. Izuku was honestly impressed. Eraser's fighting style and quirk wasn't really the best for this situation. He couldn't go against a group that large for long and he seemed to be tiring out. Then Shiggy ran at him, grabbed his scarf and got punched in the stomach. Izuku frowned, but then Eraser's hair fell down and he saw that Shiggy was gripping the hero's elbow. Shiggy leaned in close to say something and then he was disintegrating him, or at least his elbow. Christ, that looked nasty. Izuku cringed, but that's gotta hurt. A villain literally sprouted from the earth beside Izuku, but he just kicked the guy in the face enough times for him to pass out again. Eraser retreated, but then a bunch of villains came at him from every direction. Izuku sighed. Your teacher doesn't seem to be doing so well, he remarked. He heard the two hero hopefuls gasp behind him. He gritted his teeth. Shigi was going to be so sad at him for this. Izuku took off sprinting towards them, arriving just in time to hear Shigi fangirl ANG over Eraser. You're so cool, Izuku rolled his eyes. Eraser was already his favorite hero, Shigi could bugger off. The other Izuku was standing with his hands in his pockets looking bored, not participating in the fight. Shigi seemed to pause. By the way, hero, I'm not the last boss. Then and only then did Eraser notice the gigantic Nomu that was standing directly behind him. Just before the Nomu would grab Eraser, Izuku pushed him away. Which was, well, not exactly smart since now he was the one who got smashed against the ground. Well, if Izuku screamed as the Nomu broke his FANG arm. He knew he wasn't getting any special treatment since they couldn't afford for the Nomu to go easy on him. That would be too suspicious. But still, this was painful. He panted into the dirt as his arm was forced at an angle that definitely wasn't natural. Okay, think Izuku, you have to get out of this by yourself. He could feel blood gathering at his temple and sliding down his face. The Nomu was directly above him and had a good grip on his arms. He couldn't expect any help from Eraser since the guy looked worse than Izuku felt. The Nomu noticed him looking, grabbed his hair and smashed his face into the ground. Izuku clenched his fists. If he used his quirk, then this Nomu would be done for, and he was tempted to do it, but that would just ruin their plan completely. Izuku tried blinking the dirt out of his eyes. You know what? This chapter text. The last thing Izuku had expected when he had walked through Kurojire's warp gate was to see his clone standing with the hero students. It made him change his plans a bit. The heroes had already seen his face, so if they saw him, the thief, they would know. That's why he didn't fight, why he just stood and watched as the fight went on. Izuku hadn't lied back when he had fought Eraser. He was really one of his favorites. Eraserhead didn't fight for glory or for power, he was one of the real heroes. But then the green-haired Izuku came out of nowhere and pushed the bloody hero away. Izuku sighed inwardly. Here we go. Izuku had already realized that he had somewhat of a hero complex. He had wanted to be a hero for a long time. That was until he had gotten his quirk, of course, and that had happened. Izuku pushed the reminder out of his head as soon as it came to the surface and focused back on his revenge. Izuku smiled. Yes, revenge was always such a nice thing to think about when you had to lift your spirits. If only his clone would stop being such a bloody moron. But then he saw as the other Izuku got his arm broken. Izuku cringed at that, and thought back to the conversation he had had with Jean. The clone can only take so much damage before it dissolves. The guy had worn a paper bag over his head, but Izuku could still see the movement of him shaking his head. My twice can take anything on, they're invincible. Jiren had sent him a look that said, just go with it, and Izuku had nodded. I'll stay away from trouble then. This was it, the clone was going to dissolve and their plan would be for nothing. They couldn't make another clone, that was for sure. Izuku couldn't just show up as a vigilante again after bloody dissolving. But it didn't happen. The other Izuku kept screaming and thrashing, but he did not dissolve. Well shit, I guess I'm the clone. Shoyuda had seen it coming when the thief had walked out of the warp gate right alongside the hand guy. If a vigilante was cornered by a hero, they would usually try to make an escape, but the thief had fought. That was the thing that made up Shuda's mind. The thief was dangerous and he had to be stopped. The vigilante teen whose name was apparently Izuku jumped into the fight before Shoyuda could do anything. Shoyuda grumbled a curse into his scarf and pulled up his goggles, and then he went to join him. There were villains everywhere and Shoyuda didn't have time to do anything other than take down one after one. But the villains he fought just kept getting up again and again. It was an endless fight that he couldn't win. He just hoped that the students had escaped and that they had contacted some backup. But for now Shoyuda just tried to keep up with the amounts of villains coming at him from everywhere. Shoyuda was tiring fast, but he forced himself to keep going, to keep fighting. The more villains he knocked out, the less would get to his students. This was too early for them to fight for themselves. They had only started school less than a week ago. Shoyuda wrapped up the last two in his capture weapon and knocked them to the ground. He looked up and saw that the hand guy was running straight at him. Shoyuta stood up and as he ran, he sent his capture weapon after the guy. The hand guy caught it, his other hand stretched out towards Shuta's face. Though at the last second Shoyuta dodged and drove his elbow into the skinny guy's stomach. But then he caught Shuta's elbow and Shuta's quirk turned off. Ding, he cursed to himself. This was really bad timing. It's hard to see because you keep moving around, the villain said from above him, but there's an instant when your hair falls. Sheet, he noticed. That's when you've finished an action, the fabric that the villain's was touching slowly crumbled beneath his fingers, and the space in between has gotten shorter and shorter. Don't push yourself, Eraserhead. Now it was his skin that was crumbling. Shuta's arm shook with the pain and he knew that he had to get away or his arm would be done for. Shoyuta lashed out with his other arm, pushed the villain back and retreated. His elbow was literally crumbling, the effect of that guy's quirk. A villain came up behind him and he dodged the attack. Then he was suddenly surrounded. The guys were mainly people he'd already fought. But now one of his arms were practically useless. The blue-haired villain stood up, taunting Shoyuta with the truth. Yes, he knew that this fight wasn't in his favor. Sweat was literally dripping from his forehead and back at this point. Shoyuta gritted his teeth. He captured a villain in his capture weapon and used them as a shield as another villain attacked. He then punched that villain in the face and kicked another. The main villain spread his arms out, telling him how cool he was. Shoyuta got déjà vu from his fight with the thief. Should he be worried that villains liked him? By the way, hero, I'm not the last boss. Shoyuta felt a presence at his back and looked over his shoulder. There was a big black creature with a beak filled of sharp teeth. Its brain was visible and the eyes were crazed. The creature lifted its arm to grab Shoyuta, but then he got pushed away, landing several feet away. Instinctively, he retreated further back before a scream forced his attention away from the pain in his arm. It was the vigilante. The boy, Shoyuta guessed that he was around the age of his students since he and Bakugo had apparently gone to school together, was stuck in the creature's big hand, blood flowing from his arm and onto the ground. Shoyuta stared, completely shell-shocked at what he was seeing. Had that kid really pushed him away? This kid was taking what he would have received. Shoyuta stumbled to his feet, grasping his numb arm. The vigilante looked up and caught Shuta's eye. He was bleeding from his temples and nose, and his face was also covered in a lot of smaller scrapes and cuts. But then the Nomu forced the vigilante's head into the dirt again. Shoyuta was about to go help whatever way he could, but then he felt something wrap around his stomach and pull him further back. The vigilante disappeared from his eyesight as he got dragged behind a big rock. He blinked dumbly at his two students for a second before realization hit him. They hadn't made it out. The vigilante, no, Izuku, screamed again from behind them. Shoyuta gritted his teeth. He had to help. Then there was an animalistic screech and the sound of skittering gravel. Shoyuta whipped his head around to look at where he had just been. His eyes widened. The vigilante had somehow pulled out another one of his bow staffs, though Shoyuta distinctly remembered confiscating the one he had had on him, and had gotten out from under the creature. He was standing, bow staff in the hand that wasn't covered in his own blood, with gritted teeth formed in an ugly smile. The creature hadn't moved to capture him again, and the hand villain and the thief stood a bit to the side, discussing something. The hand villain was scratching at his neck with both hands. The vigilante ran away, but he was limping, moving too slowly. Shoyuta ran out and grasped his side. The vigilante hissed, so Shoyuta tried supporting him without hurting him. "Ah, don't go get all soft on me, Eraser," the vigilante gritted out. "Shut up, kid," Shoyuta grumbled back. Izuku had used one of his more subtle quirks, a strength quirk, and had kicked the Nomu and then rolled out from underneath it, the bones in his right arm cracking as he tore himself free. Pain flared up his arm and his shoulder, making him hiss. He dashed away from the Nomu, towards a wide-eyed Eraser. The hero went to him and threw Izuku's good arm over his shoulder. Izuku looked back to see that Kurogiri had appeared beside the other Izuku and Shigi, who had begun scratching at his neck with both hands. It seemed like something had went wrong anyways. Besides the Nomu getting a hold of him and breaking his arm, of course, Izuku thought bitterly. Eraser led him back behind a rock where the girl with the frog mutation quirk and the guy, who had sat in the very back of the bus, with eye bags that rivaled his teacher, were crouching. "Well, isn't this a nice little gathering?" he said, crouching down beside them. The purple-haired guy gave him an unimpressed look, and the girl just tilted her head. "Karo." Izuku wiped the blood away from under his nose with the back of his hand. His whole body felt like utter sheet, and he hadn't found a bloody healing quirk yet, so he was stuck with these inconvenient injuries. Then there was a crash from the entrance to the USJ, and All Might came waltzing in. Izuku looked at where Shigi was standing with the Nomu and other Izuku. This was why they had brought the Nomu. It was their backup plan in case All Might showed up anyways. Izuku had made sure to set up as many pre-scheduled robberies and other crimes to slow him down, but he wasn't the number one for nothing. But even though he had made it here in time, his time must have almost run out by now. Perhaps the Nomu could even win, but Izuku wasn't counting on it. As All Might walked in with a smile that looked more grim than reassuring, in fact it wasn't even a smile, so off-brand TBH, the hero hopeful smiled and called his name. Izuku's vision swam as he tried coming up with a strategy. He could still fight. "You're seconds away from passing out, you idiot," the annoying voice in his head told him. Izuku shook his head, but that just made him more dizzy. He had to brace his arm against the rock to stabilize himself. Well, stable was a strong word for his state right now. Izuku sat down against the rock with a sigh and closed his eyes. The pain was everywhere. He hadn't ever felt something like this. He felt so heavy that he imagined that he could fall right through the earth. Something grasped his shoulders and shook him gently. "Hey, don't pass out, oh eraser. Hey." Izuku opened his eyes slightly and saw the concerned face of the underground hero right in front of him. The edges of his sight was blurry though. "I might have a concussion," he noted numbly to himself. "Ah, what a pain," he said with a sigh. He rubbed his face with one hand, dried blood coming off from the touch of his fingers. He looked down at the source of the most painful wound. The bone was sticking out from his arm, which looked really gross. He hadn't felt it before, not really. It must have been because of the adrenaline or something, but he couldn't remember it hurting this much when he was still under the Nomu. Izuku looked back where All Might was fighting the Nomu. As expected, he thought dimly, All Might just kept punching it. And again. And again. And again. Shigi had told him about the Nomu. It had shock absorption and a bunch of other nifty things that made it almost indestructible. What All Might was doing was basically trying to open a door that swung outwards by pulling until the door would hopefully come off its hinges. Then suddenly there was a big crash and a cloud of dust that blocked the fight from their eyesight. Izuku closed his eyes, until suddenly he heard Kurogira's voice. "I do not want blood and guts overflowing within me, but I would be happy to take in someone as great as you. Laying it on a bit thick there, aren't we?" The fight with the Nomu was a distraction, a last resort. And when Izuku sought Shigi and the other Izuku out, they were already gone. All Might tried to tear himself from the Nom's grasp and out of Kurogira's warp gate, but to no avail. Izuku gritted his teeth, for F's sake. Then Kacen was there, blasting Kurogiri with his explosions, and simultaneously ice was spreading along the ground covering the Nomu. All Might got loose, but there was a wound in his side. Then the redhead with the spiky hair jumped in to join the fight. "Damn it, I didn't get to show off," he yelled. "Well shit, these kids are stronger than we thought, Shigaraki. Fighting them in the long run will be hard. Good luck to you." And then Izuku passed the It wasn't long after they had joined the fight that the villains made a break for it and other heroes started showing up. Katsuki looked around. He had tried looking for Deku while fighting the villains but hadn't seen him anywhere. Where was that diamond nerd? Then he spotted Aizawa-sensei, frog face and eye bags gathered by a boulder where someone else was sitting covered in blood. Katsuki's eyes widened. "Oh, Deku," he yelled as he ran over. The three others looked up at him, but he didn't spare them a glance. What the F dash? Deku was covered in blood, his own blood by the looks of it, and his arm looked like a FING horror show. Katsuki kneeled down beside him, surveying his wounds, and holy shit, there were many. "Why don't we become heroes together, Kacen?" The nerd had been so small back then, but his smile was the biggest thing in the world. A smile that had disappeared around the time everyone else got their quirks. Katsuki had smiled back at him. "I'll be a much better hero than you, Izuku. Just you wait and see." Katsuki shook his head to clear his thoughts. "Recovery girl, he yelled. "We need recovery girl over here, right now." Katsuki looked around for her, but she was still up on the platform, too far. Katsuki slid one arm under Deku's knees and another one behind his back, careful not to touch his arm, and then he lifted Deku off the ground and ran over the plaza with him. "Shitty nerd," he mumbled, "what the f has happened to you?" It was more like a snarl than a question. His classmates stared at him as he ran with Deku in his arms, or maybe it was Deku they were staring at. Katsuki didn't care either way. His thoughts couldn't catch up with the racing of his heart as he basically flew up the stairs. When Recovery Girl saw him, she immediately made her way over. Katsuki put down Deku as gently as he could and watched as Recovery Girl did her job. "Is he okay, Baku bro?" Shitty Hair asked from behind him. The idiot had probably followed him up here. "I don't know," Katsuki growled back, not taking his eyes off Deku. There was blood everywhere, it stained his clothes, caked on his skin. What had happened since he disappeared? How had he ended up as a vigilante? Why had he given up on his dream? What had happened all those years ago to kill the Izuku he had known? I don't know. Tsukachi had arrived at the scene with a bunch of other police officers after the attack had ended. Yagi's class was gathered outside, and after Tsukachi had accounted for all of them, he told them to return to their classroom. The questioning would come later. The girl in the green outfit stepped forward. "Detective, what about the vigilante?" Tsukachi looked over at where the ambulance had been a few minutes ago. The blonde boy was still standing there, looking in the direction it had gone with a scowl. He turned back to the class. "The nurses said that he was stable, he's going to be fine." That seemed to lift the class's spirits a bit. They also asked about 13 and All Might, who were also okay, and then he sent them back to their classroom. Tsukachi turned to his colleague. "Sansa, I also have some business in the nurse's office. I'll leave the rest to you." Sansa saluted with a "yes sir," and went back to work. Tsukachi told the principal that they would do a thorough investigation of the whole school, and then he left for the nurse's office. There he found Yagi and Recovery Girl. Yagi was lying down, back supported by a few pillows, looking out of the window. "Hey Yagi," he said, getting the man's attention. "Sorry to cut to the chase, but can you give me some details about the villains?" All Might sighed. "I don't know what to tell you," he said in an almost defeated tone. "That creature, whatever it was just as strong. No, that creature was stronger than me." Tsukachi's eyes widened. "If it wasn't for my students, then I probably wouldn't have one." Yagi looked him straight in the eye. "I need a successor, I need to pass it on, or else one for all will die with me." Tsukachi blinked. "You haven't given it to that third year yet?" Yagi shook his head. "I will soon. I've become weaker. There's no guarantee that I'll survive my next fight, and with the thief still out there." His expression hardened. "The symbol needs to live on." Tsukachi nodded. "You also deserve to take a break after all this time." Yagi took on a softer expression. "How are the students?" A few hours after Izuku had woken up, he was taken to the police station, his left arm in a sling. His whole body ached, but he could handle it. Pain was just pain after all. The officer who had gone to get him from the hospital offered him some tea, to which Izuku asked for coffee instead, and then he led him to an interrogation room. Izuku had never been interrogated before, but he wasn't as nervous as he thought he would be. He sat alone in the room for a while, making faces at the two-way mirror out of boredom after consuming his cup of coffee within the first half-minute. "I'm bored," Izuku complained loudly to whoever could hear him. This was honestly kind of rude. He had almost just woken up at the hospital. Granted, it was the day after the USJ attack, but still. It wasn't exactly abnormal for him to sleep for over 20 hours at a time. His record was actually 34 solid hours. Izuku yawned and laid his head on his folded arms. He rested on the metal table. "I'm so gonna miss school because of this." Well, he had already missed the first, the second, and every other day since that at his new school. He had debated actually showing up just to see the teacher's reaction. No matter how nice his new teacher was, the guy or girl or whatever would definitely be said. Izuku smiled to himself. That's what he would do tomorrow, he decided. He couldn't do much vigilante work with a broken arm anyways. Then finally, the door to the room opened and a guy with short dark hair, that looked familiar, came in with a notepad. "All right, Midoriya, I just have a few questions before we continue." Izuku arched a brow at him. "Can I get some more coffee then?" The first one didn't last very long. The man smiled a friendly smile as he sat down. We'll get you some more coffee after this. Now, I'm Detective Tsukachi and I'd like to inform you that my quirk is a truth-telling quirk, so I would recommend not lying. Izuku leaned back in his chair. Have we met before? I feel like we've met before. Okay, he was being a bit rude, but give him some slack. Life ifangsi for him right now. The detective nodded. Yes, I asked you some questions when you brought in Eraserhead, but then you ran off when I turned my back. Izuku cringed. Now that was a blunt way to put it. Okay then, Izuku mumbled. Now, you said you were quirkless? Yes, I did in fact imply that by speaking, I was pronounced quirkless at 4. That is also true. I first got my quirk when I was 7 despite the toe joints. How did you learn to fight? My father. And where is your father now? Probably on some mountain somewhere, Izuku replied with a smile. Tsukachi narrowed his eyes at him. Okay then, what about your mother? I imagine she's the same place my father is, as far as I know. Tsukachi looked down at his papers, like he was about to give up on life. Now, your mother is Midoriya Izuku, correct? Izuku nodded. But there are no records of your father. That makes sense, Izuku commented. And how is that? Izuku shrugged. The guy loves privacy. I mean, have you seen where he lives? Tsukachi leaned forward. Who is your father, Midoriya? Izuku grinned. A dangerous man. He then winked at the detective. Tsukachi sighed. Everything you've said so far has been true, but you are being very vague. Midoriya, tell me, why are you a vigilante? Izuku clicked his tongue. Why are you a police officer? Why is All Might a hero? I have my own reasons for doing what I'm doing. Thank you for answering. That was all we need to know for now. The detective got up from his seat and left the room. Izuku groaned. They were probably gonna put him in a foster home or something, and his plans wouldn't run as smoothly if he had to hide his research from 2 guardians. That would SCK, and it would take so FING long, and his mother would probably not want to stay at the mountain forever. Izuku leaned back in his chair to the point where he felt like he might fall off and looked at the ceiling until he heard the door open again. He looked down to see Eraser standing with a cup of, what Izuku hoped to be, coffee with UA's rodent principles sitting in his scarf. Like Izuku, one of his arms were in a sling. Izuku sat up somewhat straight as Eraser sat down. Didn't expect to see you here. Eraser looked like he had only slept 2 hours during the last 2 days and his glare was weak at best. Zip it, problem child, we come with a proposal. Izuku frowned. A what now? For what exactly? The rodent perked up with a big smile. He jumped out of Eraser's scarf and landed on the table. We want you to come to UA. Izuku blinked at them dumbly. What? To get things straight, Eraserhead continued, you won't exactly be a student, you'll just live at UA grounds so that we can monitor you. Since you don't have a guardian and you're underage, we've gotten special permission to take you in. Izuku blinked at them. What? He didn't think he had heard them properly. Eraser sighed. You heard right, problem child, as bad as an idea I think it is, someone needs to make sure you don't get yourself killed before you've reached the legal drinking age. God forbid, Izuku murmured sarcastically. Eraser sent him an annoyed look, and the only ones who would be able to handle you is us. Izuku glared at him. No bloody way was he going to live at a bloody hero school. That would be even more bothersome than a foster family. Izuku shook his head. Yeah, no way that's gonna happen. The rodent beamed. Here's the thing, you don't have a choice. For years ago, her baby had lost his smile and it broke Inko's heart. It was a few weeks after Hisashi had left, but the grief still hadn't gone away. The grief of him leaving and the grief of losing her baby. Izuku had stopped smiling, and with every day he retracted further into himself. Every night after he had gone to sleep, Inko sat on couch and sobbed. She tried to be strong for him but didn't know how. Their life had been torn apart so suddenly and without warning. It hurt so much, and Inko didn't know how to help her baby. Izuku had stopped playing with the other kids. Katsuki had even been by a few times to ask if he was okay and if he could see him. But every time Inko had to turn him away, and every time Katsuki lost a bit of the hope in his eyes. He couldn't know what had happened, so he didn't understand why his best friend suddenly stopped talking to him. In the beginning, Inko had thought it wouldn't last for long. She had even told Izuku it would be good for him to be around his friends, but she was met with silence. Izuku didn't talk much anymore and Inko didn't know what to do. Her baby was too young for this. He shouldn't have to feel this. He shouldn't have already known what it was like to lose. He was still a child. He was her child and she couldn't help him. She didn't know how to help him. She didn't even know how to help herself. But for now, they took one day at a time and tried to bear it. Their absence was taking a heavy toll, but they would get through this. One day at a time. So, yeah, when they asked where he lived, where he kept his stuff, he gave him his old address, the place where he had grown up. It wasn't like he could actually go get his stuff from his apartment. That would be unbelievably stupid and would most likely result in him being found out. But now he was stuck with a bunch of t-shirts and long-sleeved shirts with the dumbest sheet written on them. What in the hell had they been thinking when buying a shirt with the word dress shirt written on it? And a t-shirt with the word sheets on it. What the hell? And that's what he had to wear until he could get away from UA. Eraser had escorted him to get his stuff and had kept a watchful eye on him constantly. On the way there, Izuku had jokingly said, "I'm guessing I'm not allowed to bring my weapons?" To which the hero had just shaken his head. This guy was literally the driest Izuku had ever met. Izuku shrugged. The guy just hadn't warmed up to him yet, but he would eventually. In spite of all his other plans, he had just made it his life mission to endear himself to the insomniac. They were dropped off at the front gates by the police officer who had been lucky enough to get the job of driving them around like a less-than-nice chauffeur. Izuku shouldered his backpack of mostly just clothing and then also a few notebooks and pencils. He hadn't written a lot of quirk analysis the past year because of training and his plans and all that, but since he had a good reason, being monitored by some top heroes including the smartest rodent on the planet, to not really do anything for a while, he figured why not? Then there was also the fact that he was going to be staying at a hero school as a supposedly quirkless teen, so he could gather some information instead. As it was right now, Izuku didn't know which side he would end up on. If he had to be honest, he would admit that he had nothing against the heroes. It wasn't like every hero was bad, some were actually trying to make a better world. But he couldn't say that he didn't see sense in what the villains were saying either. He wouldn't be friends with Shigaraki and help him with his plans if he didn't believe in what the guy was trying to say. If somebody would know about the false truths the current hero society told its citizens, it would be Izuku. He had seen it firsthand. He had experienced the treatment that quirkless people got just because they weren't born with something that could prove wholly useless in one's life. Having a quirk had become the norm, and if you didn't have one, society cast you aside. The only reason Izuku had gotten accepted into the high school, that he hadn't even bothered showing up to once, was because of his immaculate grades. Not that that would matter for much longer, he would probably be thrown out soon. He wasn't as worried about that as he would have been a few years ago. It didn't matter anyways. If he didn't die during this mission of his, he would most likely end up in Tartarus. When having death as a possibility, it was hard to take trivial things seriously. But anyways, in case he ended up needing to fight heroes, it would be nice to have some sort of strategy, since, proven by the USJ incident, his spontaneous plans were utter shit. They walked in silence, down a long gravel path surrounded by trees on both sides, until they made it to a big building with 4 floors. The building had the shape of a horseshoe with a middle part that only had 2 floors. Alright, problem child, this is the teachers' dorms. It isn't all teachers who live here, so it's mostly empty and it's here you'll be staying. Eraser opened the door and went in without looking back to make sure his prisoner followed. Izuku huffed but followed nonetheless. The entrance opened up into a big room split in 3 parts. There was a kitchen and 2 long tables for dining, and then there was a living area with couches turned to face each other. Eraser turned to him. This is the common area. There'll be food at 7 each evening. The teachers who live here take turns cooking. I'll recommend being wary of Hound Dog's curry. He tends to make it so it causes the most amount of pain. He said all this with a straight face and bored eyes, and Izuku just nodded along, thinking of how he was looking forward to meeting this hound dog. Eraser walked towards a staircase. Your room is on the 3rd floor, he said and waved Izuku along. They walked up the flights of stairs and down a hallway. All the rooms they passed had a number on them, and the first even had a welcome mat that said, "Cats welcome." People not so much. Izuku could guess who lived in that room. They came to a stop in front of the second last door, which Eraser opened and then walked inside. It was bigger than Izuku had expected, and it even had an en-suite bathroom that was separated from the rest of the room by a wall and a tinted glass door, and it wasn't the size of a closet, so that was a plus. There was a desk, a bed, and a closet, which was all that was really needed. Izuku put down his bag on the bed and sat down next to it. "I'll let you settle in," Eraser said. "You can go anywhere on campus, and I don't think I need to tell you that you can't leave. If you leave, we'll have to hand you over to the authorities, and believe me, UA is better than that. The students will return tomorrow. Please don't bother them or interrupt any classes. You'll attend lessons with Nedzu from now on, but you'll still have a lot of spare time, so don't cause any trouble." Eraser stepped out of the room. "Oh, and feel free to take food from the kitchen." He then closed the door and left Izuku alone. Lessons with the principal? That was definitely going to be interesting. Izuku shrugged and stood up. Even after putting away his stuff, the clothes in the closet and the notebooks on the table, it still looked barren as f-. Whatever, I won't be here for long anyways. He still had his mission to think about: find All for One and destroy him. Okay, maybe destroy was a strong word, but the BSTRD definitely deserved it. After what had happened, Izuku couldn't forgive him. He couldn't forgive himself either, but maybe it would be easier to live with if the man was gone for good. He didn't care about the greater good, he didn't care about saving all people. Maybe that made him selfish, but he couldn't help it. He wanted revenge, and he wanted to be free. He wanted his parents to live together again without fearing for their lives. He wanted for them to be free as well. He just wanted to return to the past, but that was impossible. Only the future was left, and it held so many promises. Izuku sat at the bar with Shigaraki by his side, nursing the drink that Kurogiri had made him. The man refused to give him any of the good stuff and only made him drinks with low percentages. He had said something about Izuku not being old enough, which Izuku thought was ridiculous. "Well," Izuku said, "that SE, but we can't stop here." He downed the rest of his drink that tasted of lime and coconut rum. Beside him, Shigi nodded. "I have a plan in the making, but we need some more players if it's going to work." Izuku hummed. "This time we need some recruits who actually know what they're doing and who don't go down as easily." He ran the tip of his finger along the rim of his glass. "Maybe what we need is someone who can tire the heroes and even sustain damage without really losing." Izuku smiled. "We don't need a lot of people." Shigaraki was fully listening now. "What we need is to give them a lot of chances at the heroes." "What are you saying?" Shigi asked. Izuku pulled out his work phone and found Jiren's number. "I'm saying I know exactly the guy we need. We'll also get Jiren to start scouting again, but just for better quality." Izuku dialed his number and held it to his ear. It rang for a few moments before the broker picked up. "You've reached Jiren. Now what the F do you want?" Izuku chuckled. "I want you to persuade someone to join the dark side," Izuku said, and then shared a sharp smile with Shigaraki. Katsuki hadn't been able to rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Izuku. He saw his childhood friend covered in his own blood. It haunted his thoughts and his every waking and sleeping moment. He had told his parents that Izuku was back. His mom had been concerned as well because Auntie Inko had also left town over a month ago. Since being sent home after the USJ, he hadn't heard a thing about Izuku besides the fact that he was okay. He was restless. He hadn't seen the nerd in almost a year, and then this happens. Katsuki wanted to shake him and demand an explanation. He had already overanalyzed the last few of their encounters before Izuku had disappeared, trying to rack his brain for information he didn't have. There had to be some giveaway. Izuku couldn't just have left so suddenly without giving any hints. There had to be something that Katsuki had missed. Maybe it was the Sludge villain attack that still gave Katsuki nightmares. Maybe there was something Katsuki hadn't gotten. "You look like you needed help though, didn't you?" Katsuki bristled. All he remembered was those words, and else the memory of that day was filled with panic and the feeling of getting choked that still clogged his airways sometimes. He remembered walking down an alley with 2 extras from his class and then suddenly choking, and then being choked for what felt like a million years until he saw a pair of brilliant green eyes and felt someone grasp him. He had been thrown into the air, and then a hero had caught him and brought him to safety as he was trying to regain his breath. He had still looked for him, for he knew those eyes, he knew who had saved him, and there he was. Deku was standing on the villain with his back to the crowd looking for all the world like a hero, but this was Deku. It had made Katsuki angry beyond measure. Deku had told him years ago that the dream that they had shared together was stupid and that he didn't want to be a hero. Katsuki didn't know what had changed all that time ago. Izuku had stopped talking to him and had acted like Katsuki wasn't as good as him anymore. So Katsuki had gotten mad and had been a JRK towards Izuku, but he had always been unfazed no matter what Katsuki said or did. It was infuriating, but in the end all he had wanted was to have the old Izuku back. The Izuku who had smiled and laid plans of becoming a hero team with him. Finding out that Deku was quirkless hadn't even torn them apart or destroyed their dreams, but something had, and Katsuki wanted to know what it was. So when he stepped onto UA grounds after their small break after the incident, he was determined to get some answers. His teacher must know something about where Izuku was. So Katsuki trudged all the way to the 1A classroom, glaring at anybody who looked his way. But right as he was about to enter the building, something landed on his shoulder along with an annoying presence at his side. "Hey Baku bro. Are you on your way to class?" Shitty hair beamed at him. "Of course I'm on my way to class. Now get off or I'll blow you to pieces," he yelled at the redhead. Shitty hair just smiled wider. "Oh sick, let's go together." This idiot was obviously daft, and Katsuki was debating whether or not to actually blow him up. Apparently seeing Deku talking to Katsuki without dying had given this moron the confidence to approach and give him that stupid nickname. What the F was that even about? Katsuki shrugged off Shitty Hair's arm but didn't complain further. When they made it to the classroom, most of the others were already there. A few of them stood in a group, annoyingly near Katsuki's desk, talking about something amongst themselves. Katsuki decided to ignore them and everyone else for that matter, and sat down and plopped his head on his arms on the desk, waiting for their teacher. He tried to tune out the noise, but he still overheard their conversation. First it was just a long stream of voices, but when he actually listened he could split the words apart and it made sense. He had a habit of dissociating sometimes. So what? Some of the teachers talking, Dunce Face was saying, they haven't gotten any sleep because of heavy metal? Yeah, I think that was it. A new teacher maybe? Ears asked. Or maybe more security. Dunce Face shrugged. Don't really care to know, but I was thinking that Aizawa-sensei would probably be in a real shitty mood, that's why I told you guys. Giving us a heads up? Round Face asked with a nervous laugh. I don't think he would be that bad even if he didn't get any sleep. Raccoon Eyes gave them a thumbs up. Guys, there's no need to worry. Aizawa-sensei can seem scary, but he's still a good teacher. Yes, I agree. Four Eyes chopped through the air with his arm, making Katsuki roll his eyes. Aizawa-sensei is a professional and will definitely not let something like this affect his work. Right then the door opened with a bang and in came a very annoyed-looking eraser. His eyes flashed red and a collective chill went down every student's spine as they took their seats. Katsuki just ignored the feeling of not being able to reach for his quirk and sat up straight. It wasn't exactly a nice feeling. You could say one felt a bit powerless, but it never really lasted for that long. Oi sensei, Katsuki said. Aizawa's eyes landed on him. What happened to the nerd? His teacher made an expression that was right between anger and annoyance, but he reined it in pretty quickly. I'm assuming you're talking about a certain Midoriya Izuku? The man drawled. Katsuki nodded, not too enthusiastically of course. Aizawa glared at the door for a second, as if he was trying to direct his anger at someone he couldn't see. I guess you'll figure this out eventually anyways, he said with an exasperated sigh. The vigilante was taken into custody and because of the unique circumstance, Netsu thought it was a good idea to bring him to UA. Katsuki frowned. What? Ponytail raised her hand. What do you mean by that, sensei? Their teacher looked up at the ceiling with a defeated expression. I mean that Midoriya is roaming around on UA grounds right now, probably ruining somebody else's day. Shoyuta was tired and for once he had something other than insomnia to blame for his sleeplessness. Midoriya Izuku, that little brat, had blasted music at 1 a.m. that had woken the entire teacher's dorm. When Shoyuta had gone to commit murder, he had found Hound Dog and Snipe sitting with the brat, screaming the lyrics along with him. He had gotten them to turn down the music with an appropriate amount of glaring, but it had still kept him up for hours until around 3 a.m. it was finally turned off. It was around then that he had decided he was going to go in and smash the speaker, but then, as if Midoriya had heard his thoughts, he turned off the music. Shoyuta got in a few hours of sleep, but then the music had started up again around 5:30 in the morning. Shoyuta had jumped out of bed as if possessed and had gone straight to the problem child's room. The most annoying thing was that the vigilante didn't even show any signs of having probably slept less than Shoyuta had. He just smiled brightly at Shoyuta and had greeted him a good morning while doing push-ups with one arm. Recovery Girl had fixed the worst of the break, but the vigilante still had to wear a brace for a week or so. Shoyuta had to wear his for 2. Shoyuta had slammed the door with his good arm and had resigned himself to drown in coffee for the day. After his first hour with 1A, he dragged himself to the teacher's lounge. He had pulled out his sleeping bag and had slept like the dead until the heroics class he had with 1A and All Might. When he arrived, the class had already changed into their sports clothes and were standing in groups chattering, but then they saw him approaching and quieted down. "Alright class, today we'll be warming up for the sports festival, so we'll have some 2-on-2 fights. Now I know it's going to be 1-on-1 at the festival, but this is just practice, so go easy on each other. I'm looking at you, Bakugo. I want no trips to the infirmary." The teen huffed with a shrug. "We'll begin as soon as All Might gets here. I'll list the pairings in the meantime." Shoyuta pulled out the crumbled piece of paper with the groups that he and Yagi had decided on. He was almost done reading them aloud when he heard the number 1 hero announce his presence. "I am here," Yagi boomed and walked through the training hall's gate. Shoyuta looked over his shoulder, fashionably late at that, but we were only just getting started anyways. After having named the last group, he gestured to the large mat in the middle of the room. "Alright, Uraraka and Ida versus Kirishima and Ishido, you're up first. To win you just have to get one person of the other team out of bounds." They nodded resolutely and walked up onto the mat. Shoyuta nodded to Yagi, who then told them to begin. The first match was over relatively fast, with Ida just running Ishido out of bounds after avoiding her acid. "Arg man," Kirishima said as he walked down from the mat. Uraraka also looked a little disappointed, but this was the reality of fighting. If you were up against someone as fast as Ida, you had to adapt. Okay, next is Kaminari and Shoji versus Sato and Shinso. This one was also pretty fast since Shinso merely insulted Kaminari's shoes, to which the guy called him out for being rude. Then Kaminari simply walked out of bounds while Sato kept Shoji busy. "Uncool dude, uncool," Kaminari was saying to Shinso after he stopped using his quirk. Shinso just shrugged with a small smirk on his face. "Alright, next we have Dash. Could I propose something?" came a voice behind them. They all turned to see Midoriya leaning against the doorframe with a relaxed smile. He was wearing a variation of his vigilante outfit, though now the cargo pants were black and he wore it with a matching black tank top that showed off his arms. The bomber jacket he had ditched during the fighting in the USJ, so it hadn't been ruined when the creature had attacked him, he now wore loosely at his elbows. "What do you want, problem child?" Shoyuta almost snarled. Midoriya just smiled wider. "I'm just noticing that your students rely way too much on their quirk. It really makes their fights that much more boring. This kid was going to be the end of him. I remember you saying something about being able to take anybody here on without a weapon. Maybe you want to demonstrate?" Shoyuta shot back, knowing the vigilante couldn't fight with just one arm. "Ah yes," Midoriya said. "I'm not one to be all talk, so why not? But then we'll have a proper brawl. We'll both have a handicap with me only fighting with one arm, because of obvious reasons, and my opponent without a quirk." Shoyuta blinked at him, but he couldn't really take his dare back. A small part of him wanted to prove his class's strength to this cocky kid, but another part of him knew that Netsu would be said, in a very polite manner, if something happened to the kid. But if he was as good as he claimed to be, "Okay then, how about you fight Todoroki then?" "Aizawa, you can't possibly mean FO dash." All Might had leaned in and started whispering, but Shoyuta silenced him. "Yes, I do." Midoriya smiled even wider. Chapter text. Izuku really hadn't done a lot that day. He had gone to bed around 7 in the morning and slept to 1. He had a meeting, lesson whatever with the rodent that he was about 7 minutes late to, but the principal didn't even reprimand him. He got a cup of tea while the rodent laughed hysterically at what exactly was beyond Izuku. After the principal was done laughing, some of his tea spilled on the saucer and the table. He got a glint in his small bead eyes that Izuku couldn't interpret. "I see you fit right in the well-oiled machine that is UA," he said with a smile. Izuku hummed but barely listened to the rodent during the next 20 minutes. But he did listen when the principal dared him to do something for him. It was about a student who needed someone to knock sense into him. But that was not what interested Izuku. No, what interested him was the reward. A few hours outside of UA grounds, with a teacher of course, but it was still something. Izuku smiled sharply. This will be too easy, rat guy, just wait and see. The rodent grinned at him, and as he was closing the door to the office he heard the maniacal laughing start back up. Then he had gone to take a look around and had stumbled upon Class 1 as Heroic's lesson. He had arrived just when the first match had started and had looked on as the class used their quirks to have a quickly ended fight. For them it was just about getting one of the opponents out of bounds, but that wasn't how things happened in real life. Was this really the heroes of tomorrow? Did this speedy guy think that if he was fast enough he could save the day? That was laughable. This wasn't meant as quick lesson that just had to be over and done. No, this was Eraser's doing, and he was actually giving his students the opportunity to feel each other out. To see what it would be like to face off against each other before the sports festival. But what was his students doing? They were celebrating quick wins without learning anything. So, naturally, Izuku stepped in. Could I propose something? He drawled, gaining the attention of the class and the teachers. What do you want, problem child? Eraser asked in an annoyed tone. Izuku's smile widened a bit. He couldn't really help that he loved to get on people's nerves. Izuku shrugged a bit. I'm just noticing that your students rely way too much on their quirk. It really makes their fights that much more boring. Eraser looked ticked off at that. I remember you saying something about being able to take anybody here on without a weapon. Maybe you want to demonstrate? Now this was something. Yes, it would be a bother to fight a hero course student with his arm in a sling, and it would be kinda suspicious when he won anyways, so he would propose the next best thing that could help him prove his point. I'm not one to be all talk, so why not? I mean, we'll both have a handicap with me only fighting with one arm and my opponent without a quirk. For a second Eraser looked regretful, but then his eyes took interest. Okay then, how about you fight Todoroki then? Izuku eyed the boy with the half-white half-red hair who looked back at him blankly. All Might was saying that Eraser couldn't mean this and was probably about to go on with how he was quirkless and his arm had been broken a few days prior and all that, but Eraser silenced him. Izuku's smile turned into a complete grin. Oh, this was going to be so much fun. Katsuki couldn't believe what he was seeing. Deku, the same goddamn Deku, who had been severely injured at the USJ, was going to fight the guy that even Katsuki was a bit intimidated of. But they were going to fight completely without quirks, so he would be fine, right? Katsuki clenched his teeth. This was stupid. Deku should be resting, not taking on the number 2 hero's son. For sake. Izuku walked up onto the mat like he didn't have a care in the world. The half-and-half BSTRD followed him with his usual blank expression. They faced each other and then Sensei yelled at them to begin. Even if I don't use my quirk you are still at a disadvantage, half-and-half said with a bored tone, like he was stating a fact. Then this shouldn't be that hard for you, Deku prompted with a playful smile. Icy Hot sighed, and then it was half-and-half who ran at Deku. Deku pet his head back and smirked, and a few seconds before half-and-half punched him in the face he ducked and turned, and then he was behind half-and-half, kicking at the back of one of his knees. Half-and-half stumbled and his eyes widened, but he caught himself right before he would bite the dust. All the while Deku still had the hand of his one good arm in his pocket. Katsuki couldn't help gaping along with the rest of the extras, though he closed his mouth a bit faster. Icy Hot looked a bit confused that he hadn't even touched Deku, but he gathered his resolve pretty quickly and tried again. This time Deku did a FING cartwheel with one hand and dodged half-and-half's attack. Deku was literally playing with him. You know, Deku was saying, quirks are physical abilities too, but honing the strength in your quirk is not everything there is. He twirled out of reach when half-and-half got close again. And I've heard that you don't even do that properly, so what do you want to achieve? Icy Hot had gritted teeth and was starting to look angry or frustrated or both, probably both. Maybe you should stop screwing around. Then it was Deku who attacked. Icy Hot took a step back, having obviously not suspected this, but it was to no avail. Deku got in a punch right to half-and-half's solar plexus that sent him flying back. Icy Hot gasped but got up almost immediately. Shut up, he said, looking more than said. Deku grinned. then hit me. Half and Half ran at him, but it was not calculated. He was too angry to be smart about it. Katsuki didn't think he would ever see Icy Hot make that mistake. Deku grabbed his collar, sidestepped the punch, and drew him in close. He said something to Icy Hot that made his eyes widen but was too low to be heard from where they were standing. Then he literally threw Icy Hot out of bounds. The whole class was struck dumb and from the expression of their teachers. They were too. Half and Half was one of the top students in their class. Deku walked down the steps off the mat with an indifferent expression. You should all be grateful that your teacher is not a villain, he shrugged. If he was, you would all be F-ed. His smile was friendly now. But you see what I mean? You could probably all gain skills that aren't associated with your quirk. You'll definitely become better heroes because of it too. It actually looked like the other extras were listening to him. Well, he had certainly gotten their attention. Even Katsuki couldn't stop staring at the nerd. What the actual F was that about? But he just felt a weirdly warm feeling in his stomach when seeing this side of Deku. It reminded him a bit of the Deku of his childhood with all his dreams and hopes, just this one was a lot older and sharper. He was more viciously cunning than he had ever been in the past, and Katsuki couldn't stop staring. Deku patted Aizawa-sensei on the shoulder. It's just an idea, he shrugged. Anyways, you can carry on, I suppose. Katsuki looked at his classmates and then at Deku. This definitely wasn't exactly the same person as he remembered, but it was Deku alright, and this version of him was so much more fun. Oidikayu! Katsuki yelled as he walked over to the vigilante. Deku frowned. What is it, Kacen? Katsuki glared at him. I need to talk to you, he said. Right now. He then grabbed Deku's wrist and stormed out, leaving the class to gape at them. After they had rounded a corner, far enough away that his class would only hear them if he began yelling, Katsuki abruptly stopped. He turned around. Where have you been? He demanded. Deku looked a bit shocked, but only for about a second, and then he smiled, that fake but smile he showed so often now. Ah, Kacen, did you miss me? Katsuki tisked and ignored the nerd's question. I even went to your effing home to look for you, and then it's your mother who tells me that you've left. Deku's smile had dropped a bit. I don't see you for almost a year, and then you randomly show up with my teacher who says you're a vigilante. Katsuki took a step towards him and poked him in the chest. So where were you? Deku blinked at him, his mouth slightly open. I was with my dad. Katsuki bristled. Your mom already told me that. He snapped. But why did you leave? He stepped back. Why? Deku looked shocked. Katsuki struggled for words. Was it because he felt like his words were choking him, but he forced himself to ask. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about it. Always speculating about the reason, replaying scene after scene in his head until he went mad. He glared at Deku. Was it because of me? Deku's eyes widened. He put his hands out towards Katsuki like he was trying to calm down a dangerous animal. No, it wasn't because of you, it's just he rubbed at the back of his neck, he sighed. Something happened, maybe one day I'll tell you what, but it wasn't about you, he smirked. I mean, you were pretty shit at bullying. Katsuki gaped for a second before It was you who were bad at being bullied. You just agreed with whatever I said while rolling your eyes. Deku rolled his eyes and Katsuki pointed at him. See? The nerd chuckled. Yeah, sure. Now off back to your class, he shoved Katsuki. Katsuki shoved him back. Yeah, like hell, I finally got a hold of you, ratty nerd BC. Deku smirked at him. Alright then, I'll look forward to seeing you getting knocked on your butt at the festival then. Katsuki huffed. Like any of these extras can do that. Deku just shrugged with his one free hand tugged in his pocket. We'll see. Katsuki clenched his fists but didn't reply and merely trudged back to his class. A battle had just ended with Tail, Tape, Grape, and Rockface. Aizawa-sensei regarded him with a bored look. Great, you're back. Then his teacher looked down at his list. Alright, next will be Aoyama and Azui versus Yaoyorozu and Hagakure. Katsuki scowled. That meant he was last and with one person only remaining as his opponent. It would be fine though. He looked over at his opponent as the teams made it to the mat. She leveled him with a bored stare and he grinned. Shigaraki groaned. I really hate that Stain guy. Izuku didn't bother looking up from his phone where he was playing a game. How come? He knew asking would just incite Shiggy to rant about things that he didn't like for a hell of a long time, but whatever, he didn't have anything else to do. It's just that we attacked the FING top school in the country and he is still getting more screen time. He's all people ever talk about. Stain this, stain that. Izuku put down his phone. Why not try to recruit him? Then when they talk about him, they'll talk about the league too. Shiggy huffed. The guy has too strong morals. He thinks he's some kind of vigilante, doing society a favor. He stuck his tongue out of his mouth with a disgusted expression on his face. Izuku laughed. Oh yeah, I heard about his whole fake hero thing. So he thinks he's better than us, or what? Shiggy nodded. Yeah, but we'll try recruiting him anyways. Could be good PR. Izuku jumped off the bar stool and stretched. We could also just kill him. That would get people talking a bit. Shigaraki smiled at him. I like how you're thinking. Well anyways, Izuku yawned. I should go with some heroes so they don't think I'm dead or something. Izuku shrugged on his long dark coat and went to open the door, but his hand grasped at nothing. Shiggy? Where the F is the doorknob? He looked over his shoulder at the blue-haired guy with a brow raised and a slight smile. He already had an idea of what had happened. Shiggy glared at him. I disintegrated it. There, you made me say it, you little sheet. Izuku shrugged. Honest mistake, I'll just go out from the roof. Shiggy just glared at him. Izuku turned towards the door that led to the staircase with a chuckle and pushed it open. The air was chilly tonight and it surrounded him like a nice cooling blanket after being stuck inside in the warm interior of the bar all day. He stretched his arms up above himself and felt some places along his spine crack pleasantly. They had easily gotten Jean persuaded to join them, and now, as Shigaraki put it, they just needed some more players with higher MP since the HP was taken care of with Jin's quirk. Izuku looked out at the city. There had to be some people out there that would want to join their noble cause. They already had Jiren out looking, but there was no harm in Izuku also taking a look while maintaining the public knowledge of his presence in the city. He of course knew that there were some pros out there who were targeting him. He hadn't expected any different since the rumors of his quirk was a popular topic on forums and such. But whatever. Izuku took off across the roofs and headed towards the more sketchy parts of town. That's where the pros would assume he was, so that's where he would be. He didn't bother looking for fights since stealing quirks was a waste of time considering that he would probably dissolve or something at some point. Not that he cared enough to care. And not like that made any sense, but Izuku just tried to go with the flow. Being a clone really put stuff into perspective. He could just do whatever and Izuku, would still be out there. Though that Izuku was with the heroes. Something blue caught Izuku's eye and he came to a jogging stop. It was like a flickering light dancing along the walls of an alley a few streets over. Izuku cleared the distance easily and perched on the edge, looking down at the scene from above. He was immediately hit with the smell of burnt flesh that almost made him GG. In the alley, a few people were lying on the ground encased in lazy blue flames. Izuku counted 3 forms that might have looked very human just a few minutes ago. A fourth guy, the person whom Izuku presumed to be the one who had done the grilling of the other 3, stood slumped against the back wall of the alley. Izuku made his way down there out of curiosity, but when he came close he realized that the guy was shaking pretty bad. He was tall but pretty thin and his hair was a black spiky mess, not unlike Kacen's. Izuku clicked his tongue as he approached. So what did these sorry-looking fuckers do to deserve this? He said in a bored tone, kicking one of them out of his way. The guy's head whipped up so fast that it looked like it hurt and he held out his hand and sent flames directly at Izuku, who just brushed them off with a gust of wind. That won't work on me. The guy looked shocked for a second, but then he seemed to slump in on himself. He had some ugly-looking scars on his face and arms, but it was hard to tell in this darkness. They were both silent for a second, but then the guy laughed bitterly. Then just kill me, will you? Kill you? Now why would I do that? I just asked you a question. Izuku put his hands in his pockets. No need for any killing. The guy blinked at him. He took in a deep breath and hung his head. I owed them money. Money you didn't have, I presume? The guy's eyes turned hateful. What is it to you? Izuku leaned against the alley wall with a sigh. Nothing really, but tell me something, will you? What do you think about heroes and the current society? Why not go straight to the point? The guy grimaced. Both pretty shitty. Izuku smiled at him and pulled out a business card that Jiren had given him. It was a bit crumbled now, but you could still see the number. He threw the card on the ground in front of the guy, since approaching him to hand it to him seemed like a bad idea. Izuku pointed at the card. If you ever want to join in the fight, give that number a call and ask for the thief. The guy lifted a brow at him. The thief? Izuku scratched the side of his neck. Yeah, well, I can't go around giving people my own name. Huh. The guy seemed to consider him. Does this joining the fight thing have any benefits? Izuku shrugged. A place to stay, some allies, free drinks and such. He turned around and started walking. Think about it, he yelled over his shoulder. He then went on his merry way again and spent the next few hours just walking around town, scaring more than a few people who must have recognized him. He gave away a few more of Jiren's business cards to a few other promising-looking people. The irony didn't escape him that he had done a 180 on his nightly activities. Instead of stealing quirks from villains, he was recruiting them, or at least, he tried to. Most people didn't want anything to do with him. Too bad for them, I'm excellent company. On the day of the sports festival, Izuku made himself comfy in the student stands. They were all abandoned for now because everyone was going to participate in the first stage. He had gotten himself the biggest can of popcorn available even though he had to stand in a long line for it. He just made it to the stands by the time the first years were making their way to the stage where Midnight was standing. Quiet everyone, she said into her microphone and cracked her whip. Representing the students is Katsuki Bakugo from Class 1A. Oh, this was going to be good. Kacen made his way to the stage slowly, his hands still in his pockets like he didn't have a care in the world. All the first years seemed to be holding their breaths as Kacen stood in front of the microphone. I pledge he drawled, that I will win, and with that he looked directly at Izuku. The first years began protesting, but Kacen was unbothered. Izuku burst into full-body laughter that literally hurt his stomach. This was such a Kacen thing to do. Oh, for F's sake. Izuku laughed some more. Some of the spectators who were seated at public stands closest to where Izuku was looked at him funny. Izuku ignored them and tried to breathe. Now, let's get started right away. The first game is what you'd call a qualifier. Every year many drink their tears here. That's a tad dramatic. Now here is the fateful first game. Behind her a screen was shuffling between different activities like a machine at a casino would. This year it landed on obstacle race. Izuku had finished his laughter and leaned forward at this. It seemed like fun, this, but only 4 kilometers? Hisashi used to send him on runs through the mountains that were more than 3 times that, once during a bloody snowstorm. As long as you stay on the course, it doesn't matter what you do. Midnight said, now, take your places everyone. The students moved to the tall but very narrow gate. This was almost too good to pass up. Right as the last horn blared and the gates opened, Izuku jumped down from the stands.